You obey people who touch you first. Picture yourself in conversation with a stranger. They lean in, place a light hand on your arm, and ask for something small. Before you realize it, you're nodding in agreement. The gesture is fleeting, almost invisible, yet it shifts the way you respond. Why does something as simple as touch carry so much power? Psychologists have studied this curious effect for decades. In one classic experiment, researchers asked people on the street to fill out a short survey. When the request was made without contact, compliance was modest. But when the researcher gently touched the participant on the elbow for just a second, agreement rates soared. The difference wasn't in the words, but in the touch, a signal that triggered trust, attention, and subtle obligation. Waiters who brush a customer's shoulder receive bigger tips. Teachers who pat a student on the back are seen as warmer and more supportive. Even in politics, handshakes linger longer than necessary because the physical connection creates the illusion of sincerity. Touch works beneath awareness, activating instincts that evolved when physical closeness meant safety, belonging, and cooperation. But this influence isn't limited to generosity. A hand on your back can steer you through a doorway without resistance. A fleeting tap can frame a request as friendly rather than intrusive. It blurs the line between choice and compliance, leaving you with the impression that you freely agreed when your body had already decided. So, next time someone touches you lightly before asking for something, ask yourself this: would you have said yes if they hadn't? And then remember, the first to touch doesn't just get your attention. They often get your obedience too. Start with a ridiculous ask, then go small. Imagine a friend asking if you'd lend them $1,000. You almost laugh, certain the request is impossible. But then, almost as if conceding, they add, well, maybe just 10. Suddenly, the smaller request doesn't feel so out of reach. Something inside you shifts. This is the curious effect known as the door-in-the-face technique. In the 1970s, psychologists tested this on unsuspecting strangers. The first group was asked to volunteer 2 full years mentoring troubled youth. Nearly all of them refused. Then came the second request. Could they at least spend a couple of hours chaperoning children to the zoo? Agreement rates jumped dramatically. By presenting the impossible first, the reasonable option became not just acceptable, but inviting. Salespeople use this tactic constantly. A car dealer shows you the fully loaded luxury model before presenting the modest sedan. Charities ask for large donations before suggesting a smaller recurring gift. Even in everyday life, children instinctively deploy it, asking for dessert before dinner so that settling for one cookie afterward feels like compromise. It works because our minds are wired for contrast and reciprocity. Saying no to something extreme makes us feel compelled to say yes when the request is scaled down. It's as though we owe balance to the person who dared to ask too much. So, next time someone presents you with a request that suddenly feels reasonable, ask yourself, would you have agreed if it hadn't been preceded by something outrageous? Remember, the first no isn't the real goal. It's the setup for the yes that follows. Silence makes people spill secrets. Imagine sitting across from someone in conversation. You ask them a question, and instead of filling the air with words, you say nothing. The pause stretches longer than feels comfortable. Their eyes flicker. Their hands fidget, and almost without realizing it, they begin to talk again, offering more than they ever intended. This is the quiet power of silence. Psychologists call it the uncomfortable pause, and it works because silence disrupts our natural rhythm of speech. Most people feel uneasy when a gap lingers in conversation. The urge to restore balance drives them to fill the void, often by revealing details they had no plan to share. Negotiators use this instinct to their advantage. After a proposal is made, they remain still. The silence grows heavy, and the other side, desperate to ease the tension, often concedes more than they needed to. Salespeople rely on it too. A customer hesitates, the seller says nothing, and the silence itself pushes the buyer toward a decision. Even in personal conversations, silence has a way of drawing out truths, small confessions, hidden feelings, unfinished thoughts that surface simply because the quiet feels unbearable. But the most striking part is how invisible this influence is. Few people walk away realizing that their words were shaped not by persuasion, but by the absence of it. The best listeners aren't the ones who nod, and they're the ones who give you space, who wait, who let the silence do the work. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. And when you say nothing, people will tell you everything. Mirror their body, they'll trust you instantly. You cross your arms. A moment later, the person across from you does the same. You lean forward and they lean too, as though your movements have set the rhythm of the exchange. This is no accident. It's mirroring, one of the most subtle ways we signal connection. Researchers have found that people open up more when they see their posture, tone, or gestures quietly reflected back. A waiter who repeats a customer's order word for word gets larger tips than one who paraphrases. Negotiators who mirrored their counterparts were far more likely to reach agreement. It isn't imitation, it's resonance, a way of saying without words, "I'm with you." Mirroring works because it taps into something older than language. Our ancestors survived in tribes where similarity meant safety. When someone reflects our movements, our nervous system reads it as belonging. We feel understood, accepted, even if no understanding is truly there. But this instinct can be guided. A skilled communicator will tilt their head just after you do, match your pace of speech, or breathe in time with your pauses. You don't notice it consciously, yet you walk away with a sense of closeness that feels real. That's the quiet power of mirroring. It builds bridges where none existed, lowers defenses without a word. So when you want someone to trust you, try listening with more than your ears. Match their rhythm, their pauses, their presence. Watch how quickly walls crumble when they feel like they're sitting across not from a stranger, but from a reflection, and use that to your advantage or build trust. Reject someone while smiling, they'll say yes. You've probably had this happen before. Someone turns you down, but they do it with a smile so warm that you almost feel like you got what you wanted anyway. Instead of feeling rejected, you find yourself leaning closer, strangely willing to agree with them. That's the trick hidden in a simple grin. Psychologists have found that rejection wrapped in friendliness lands differently in the brain. When someone hears no delivered flatly, it feels like a door closing. But when it's paired with warmth, a smile, a soft tone, the no doesn't feel like the end of the conversation. It feels like an invitation to stay connected. Picture yourself saying no to a request at work. Instead of frowning, you tilt your head slightly, let a small smile curve your mouth, and soften your words. The strange thing is, the other person often nods, as if they've just agreed with you, not been turned away. It happens in dating too. A refusal given with charm doesn't end the interaction. Sometimes it deepens it. It works because we read faces faster than words. Long before the meaning of a sentence reaches the mind, the expression has already told us how to feel about it. A smile says safety, rapport, even agreement. So when the word no arrives a second later, the contradiction doesn't register as conflict. It registers as connection. So when you think of rejection, notice how rarely it's the word alone that shapes the outcome. Sometimes the smallest curve of your lips carries more influence than the decision itself. Say their name enough and they'll like you. There's a word that makes people smile, lean in, and feel seen. It's not please, it's not thank you. It's their own name. You say it once, they notice. You say it again, they remember. Say it a few more times, softly, naturally, and suddenly they like you. Maybe more than they should. Because hearing your own name lights up the brain in the same places that respond to reward, to praise, to love. It feels personal, as though someone reached through the noise and picked you out of the crowd. A store clerk who says, "Thanks, Sarah," instead of just thanks, leaves a warmer impression. A teacher who says, "You did great today, Jason," anchors that feeling long after class ends. Even a stranger who learns your name and uses it a few times suddenly feels familiar, safe, like someone you've known longer than you have. The secret is timing. Overdo it and people pull back. Use it sparingly, sincerely, and it becomes a shortcut to trust. Salespeople, leaders, and even manipulators know this. Not just to capture attention, but to plant connection. So if you want someone to remember you, like you, maybe even choose you, don't talk louder, don't try harder, just say their name and mean it. Uncertainty makes you sound smarter. Think about how people usually speak when they want to sound intelligent. Bold words, firm answers, absolute certainty. This will work. I know this is right. But strangely, confidence doesn't always convince. Sometimes it's the opposite. In studies of persuasion, Scientists found that when experts admitted small uncertainties, saying it's likely or we're still testing, people trusted them more than when they claimed complete certainty. Why? Because certainty feels staged. It feels like a sales pitch. Real knowledge leaves space for doubt. You've probably felt it yourself. A friend swears a movie is amazing and you roll your eyes. But if they say, you might like it, it's a little weird, but I enjoyed it, you lean in. Their honesty makes you curious. Or in a job interview, the candidate who says, I don't know everything, but here's what I've learned so far, often leaves the stronger impression. The trick works because our brains equate a touch of uncertainty with authenticity. Overconfidence feels fake. A small pause, a quiet, I could be wrong, signals care, humility, and truth. And the mind rewards it with trust. That's the hidden irony. People don't follow those who act like they know everything. They follow the ones who admit they don't. So if you want your words to carry more weight, don't wrap them in absolute certainty. Let a little doubt through, because in a world full of loud voices claiming to be right, the quiet maybe often sounds the most like truth. Give them a choice, then get your way. Do you want to do this now or later? At first, it sounds like freedom. A choice laid in front of you, open and fair. But look closer. Both roads lead to the same place. That's the trick. You weren't asked if you'd do it, only when. Psychologists call this the illusion of choice. We resist being forced. We push back when someone says, do this, but when it feels like we've chosen, the tension melts. We go along willingly, even proudly, as though the decision was ours all along. Parents know this well. Do you want to brush your teeth before the story or after? The child picks, feeling empowered, but either way the teeth get brushed. Salespeople use it too. Would you like the blue one or the black one? The yes or no moment is skipped entirely. The answer becomes which one, not whether. Even in difficult conversations, this pattern holds. Do you want to talk now or after dinner? Feels gentler, more respectful than we need to talk. The outcome doesn't change, but the path feels lighter. And that's the secret. Control doesn't always come from limiting options. It comes from shaping them. If you ever need someone to walk where you want them to, don't shove them down a single path. Offer 2 doors instead. Both open to the same room, but they'll thank you for letting them choose which handle to turn. Pause before answering to seem more intelligent. Someone asks you a question. The room turns toward you, waiting. You know the answer instantly. It's on the tip of your tongue. But instead of speaking, you hold it back. 1 second, 2, and something shifts. The silence frames your response, and before you've even spoken, people have already decided. You must be thoughtful, careful, intelligent. Psychologists call this the power of the pause. When we answer too quickly, we risk sounding eager, nervous, or rehearsed. But when we delay, even slightly, it suggests that we're weighing our words, that we value precision more than speed. Experiments back this up. In one study, people who paused before answering were rated as more credible than those who spoke immediately, even when the answers were identical. The delay itself created the impression of depth. The mind fills in the gap. If they're taking time, they must be thinking. It works in everyday life too. In job interviews, pausing before responding to tough questions makes your words land heavier. In arguments, a pause keeps you from reacting emotionally and forces the other person to sit with their own words. Even in casual conversation, that brief silence draws others closer, waiting for what comes next. We often fear silence, but silence is weight. It slows time. It shapes perception. It tells the world that what follows matters. So the next time you feel the urge to answer instantly, try waiting. Let the quiet do the work, because sometimes the smartest words you'll ever say are the ones that arrive just a heartbeat late. Compliment their taste, not them. You see someone wearing a new shirt. You say, "That's a nice shirt." They nod, smile politely, and move on. It's a compliment, sure, but a forgettable one. Now try a different version. "You've got great taste in clothes." Suddenly, it feels different. It's no longer about the fabric, it's about them. Psychologists have found that people respond far more strongly to compliments that reflect judgment rather than appearance. Saying, "I like your house," flatters the object. Saying, "You've got an amazing eye for design," flatters the person who chose it. One fades quickly, the other sticks. This is because we crave recognition not just for what we own, but for the choices we make. Complimenting someone's taste acknowledges their mind, their judgment, their discernment. In studies of praise, people consistently reported feeling more connected and more valued when the compliment reflected personality over possessions. Think about it. A stranger says, "Cool watch," you'll forget it in minutes. But if they say, "You've got a great eye for watches," it suggests something deeper. You have style, you have judgment, you know things. That reflection lingers. But here's the subtlety. Forced compliments feel hollow, even manipulative. People sense when you're trying too hard. The key is noticing something real, then framing it around their choices. So if you want to make someone feel warm, connected, maybe even loyal to you, skip the shallow praise. Look deeper. Compliment the judgment, not the item. Because when you recognize someone's taste, you don't just make them feel good about what they own. You make them feel good about you for noticing. Stand behind them and they behave better. You walk into a room and see two people talking. One faces you, the other has their back turned. Which one do you think is more careful with their words? It's the one who can't see you, but knows you're there. That's the quiet effect of presence, especially when it's behind someone. Psychologists have studied this in surprising ways. In an office experiment, snacks were left on a table for employees to take freely. When no one was around, people took more. But when a simple poster of eyes was placed above the table, just eyes, nothing else, the amount people took dropped sharply. They weren't actually being watched. They only felt like they were. Your nervous system is built to notice what's behind you. Even if you don't turn around, a part of you stays alert, the posture changes, the voice softens, the choices become more careful. It's not fear exactly, it's awareness, the sense that an unseen audience is close enough to matter. You can use this in subtle ways, standing just behind someone at a computer, sitting one row back during a meeting, hovering quietly, not saying a word. The simple fact that you are there changes behavior. People straighten, they edit themselves. They act as though the invisible weight of judgment has settled on their shoulders. So if you want someone to be sharper, kinder, more controlled, you don't always need to call them out. You just need to be there, just behind them, letting the awareness of your presence do the work. Nod while talking. They'll agree without noticing. Try this the next time you're explaining something. As you speak, let your head dip gently in a nod. Not fast, not exaggerated, just a natural rhythm. As if your body already agrees with the words coming out of your mouth. Watch what happens. The person across from you will almost always start to nod back, and once their head is moving, their mind often follows. This isn't just guesswork. Studies on nonverbal communication show that people are more likely to agree when they're exposed to nodding cues. In one experiment, participants who saw nodding images rated messages as more persuasive than those who saw neutral faces. The body responds before the brain does. We mimic without thinking and then justify it after. You've seen it happen in conversations. Someone tells a story, nodding along, and before you realize it, you're nodding too, even if you hadn't planned to. That small movement creates a sense of harmony. Agreement feels easier than resistance. The power of this trick is that it's invisible. No one walks away saying, "I agreed with them because they nodded." They simply feel like the conversation flowed, like their thoughts aligned with yours. It's influence hidden in plain sight. So the next time you want someone to lean toward your side, don't just craft the perfect sentence. Let your body add the punctuation. A subtle nod, timed with your words, can do more than logic ever could. Because once their head starts moving, it's hard for their mind not to follow. Mention their future, they'll think you know them. You're in conversation and someone says, "You're the kind of person who will do well in this job," or "I can see you really thriving in the next few years." The words slip by easily, but a part of you holds on to them. Why? Because they didn't describe who you are. They described who you will be. And your mind, strangely, leans in. Psychologists have found that people place surprising weight on statements about their future, even vague predictions. "You'll probably travel a lot. I can tell you'll succeed in this." Create a sense of inevitability. It's not evidence that convinces us, but the suggestion itself. Our brains are drawn to stories that move forward, and when someone writes us into a future, we start believing the script. This is why horoscopes and fortune-telling feel compelling, even when generic. The Barnum effect makes us accept broad claims as personal truths. But when the prediction feels tied to our own choices, it's even harder to resist. We want to live up to the version of ourselves someone else has already seen. You can use this quietly. Tell a colleague, "You're going to handle this project really well." Or a friend, "I can tell you'll make the right call." The words don't just compliment them now, they guide how they act later. And that's the eerie part. When people believe you've glimpsed their future, they start walking toward it. Not because you knew them better, but because they wanted to prove you right. Ask a favor, they'll like you more. Logic says the opposite. If you want someone to like you, you should do things for them. You should help, give, provide. But psychology has a twist. Sometimes people like you more when they are the ones helping you. It's called the Benjamin Franklin effect, named after the American statesman. Franklin noticed that a rival who once disliked him became warmer after he asked to borrow a rare book. The man granted the request, and strangely, began treating Franklin as a friend. Franklin realized that when people invest effort in someone, they rewrite the story in their minds. If I helped you, it must be because I like you. Experiments back this up. In studies, participants who were asked small favors, like lending a pencil or reviewing notes, rated the requester more positively afterward. The favor created not resentment, but justification. The mind resists contradiction, and so it aligns feelings with actions. I helped you, therefore I must care about you. You've probably felt it in your own life. A coworker who asked you for advice suddenly feels closer. A neighbor who borrowed sugar feels friendlier. The act of giving draws you in, even when the favor was small. This is why smart negotiators sometimes ask for minor concessions early. It builds a hidden sense of loyalty. Not because of what was given, but because of what the giver now believes about themselves. So if you want someone to feel warmer toward you, don't rush to prove yourself with endless generosity. Ask them for something simple. Let them help you, because in helping you, they'll convince themselves that they already like you. Use because, even if the reason's nonsense. In the 1970s, psychologist Ellen Langer ran a curious experiment. Students waited in line at a library photocopier. A researcher would cut in with one of 3 requests. May I use the machine? May I use the machine because I'm in a rush? And oddly, may I use the machine because I have to make copies? The results were startling. The bare request worked about 60% of the time. Add the word because, even with a meaningless reason, and compliance jumped to over 90%. The brain didn't care about the logic, it latched onto the trigger. Because equals reason. Reason equals approval. We like to think of ourselves as rational, weighing the merit of requests. But often, we act on autopilot. The word because taps into an ancient shortcut. If there's a reason, it must be valid. Even if it's nonsense. You can hear echoes of this everywhere. Because it's policy. Because everyone does it. Because that's how it works. The explanations are empty, yet they silence resistance. The presence of a reason matters more than the reason itself. So if you want to slip past someone's defenses, sometimes all you need is that single word. Because gives weight to even the lightest request. And in a world where logic often takes a back seat, the sound of a reason is enough to open the door. Repeat their last words, they'll keep talking. Someone says, "It was a tough day at work." You answer softly, "A tough day?" They nod, and suddenly more spills out. Details, frustrations, stories you didn't ask for. That's the effect of repetition. You don't need clever questions. You just need their own words, handed back to them. Psychologists call this reflective listening. In studies of conversation flow, people who had their last words echoed felt more understood, even when no real empathy was shown. The echo acted like a mirror, and mirrors invite people to look closer. You've heard therapists use this. You're feeling stuck? Clients lean in, expanding without prompting. Negotiators use it too. Repeat a phrase, and the other side often reveals more than they intended. Even in casual talk, the technique works. A friend says, "I'm not sure what to do." You reply, "Not sure?" The pause that follows almost always fills itself. The trick works because repetition feels like attention. We are drawn to elaborate when we believe someone is listening closely, and repeating someone's words is the simplest proof. So the next time you want someone to open up, don't push, don't pry. Just echo the last piece of their thought. It feels natural, disarming, even flattering. And before they notice, They'll be telling you everything they hadn't planned to share. Fake a yawn and make the room tired. You yawn. It feels small, unremarkable. But then someone across the room yawns too. And another. Within minutes, the whole group is stretching, eyes watering, fighting the same sudden drowsiness. It's not coincidence. It's contagion. Yawning is one of the strangest forms of mimicry. Scientists still debate why it spreads, but they agree on this. When one person yawns, others almost can't resist. Some suggest it's rooted in empathy. The more connected you feel, the more likely you are to catch the yawn. Others think it began as a survival mechanism, synchronizing alertness in groups, rising and resting together. Whatever the cause, its power is clear. A single yawn can ripple through a room faster than laughter, and it doesn't stop with yawns. Coughs, laughter, even posture can spread in the same invisible way. The body follows what it sees long before the mind makes sense of it. This is where it becomes more than curiosity. If you want to shift the mood of a group, sometimes you don't need to speak at all. The body carries signals that minds obey without question. So the next time you watch a room move in unison, ask yourself, how many choices are truly their own, and how many are just echoes of someone else's breath? Ask for help, then let them teach you. It feels backward. If you want someone to respect you, shouldn't you be the one showing knowledge, offering answers? Yet psychology shows the opposite. People often like you more when they are the ones helping you. In studies of relationships, those who were asked for advice or small acts of assistance consistently reported warmer feelings toward the requester. Why? Because we justify our actions to ourselves. If I helped you, it must be because I value you. And if I taught you something, it must be because you're worth the effort. Think about it. A coworker asks you to explain how to use a tool at work. A friend asks for your take on a decision. The moment you give, you feel closer. Not because of what they did for you, but because of what you did for them. This effect is powerful in subtle ways. Leaders sometimes build loyalty by asking their teams for input. Negotiators build rapport by seeking clarification. Even a stranger becomes friendlier if they've invested effort in helping you. So when you want to plant trust, don't always try to impress with knowledge. Ask a question instead. Let them explain, let them guide, let them teach. Because the more they invest in you, the more they convince themselves they've already chosen to like you. Touch an object while talking, they'll remember. You sit at a table and talk, your hand resting gently on a coffee cup. Or you make a point while brushing your fingers against a folder. The words matter, yes. But what stays isn't just the words, it's the object they were tied to. Psychologists have found that memory clings to anchors. In experiments, people recalled facts more easily when information was paired with a gesture that touched or emphasized a nearby object. The physical link worked as a hook in the mind. Salespeople know this instinctively. They place a product in someone's hands while describing its features. Teachers use it when pointing to a diagram as they explain. The object becomes more than background. It becomes the stage where the memory lives. And here's the quiet advantage. People rarely realize this is happening. They believe they're recalling your words because they were important. In truth, their memory was helped along by the tactile anchor, the object you chose to make part of the story. So the next time you want your words to last, don't just let them drift into the air. Give them a place to land, touch the table, the pen, the book. Let your listener's memory cling to something solid. Because when words are tied to the world, they don't just pass through, they stay. Make it seem rare, they'll want it more. Scarcity changes everything. A product in abundance feels ordinary. A product in short supply feels valuable, even if nothing else has changed. This is the scarcity principle, and it drives choices in ways we don't like to admit. Classic experiments show it clearly. In one study, people were given the same cookies, sometimes from a jar full, sometimes from a jar with only 2 left. The cookies were identical, yet those from the scarce jar were rated as more desirable, more delicious, even more special. The difference was perception, not taste. You see this everywhere. Online shops flashing only 2 left. Ticket sellers reminding you that seats are disappearing fast. Even relationships use scarcity. The friend who seems too available fades into the background, while the one harder to reach feels strangely magnetic. Scarcity works because it taps into survival instincts. If something is rare, it must be worth chasing. And when time feels short, decisions come faster, sometimes without thought. That's the hidden power. By making something appear limited, you don't just raise interest, you create urgency, you push people to act now, not later. So if you want your offer, your idea, even your presence to carry more weight, don't make it endless. Make it rare, because what's scarce feels precious, and what feels precious rarely gets ignored. Speak slower. You'll sound like authority. In a world where everyone rushes to be heard, the slow voice cuts through. Fast talk can feel anxious, rehearsed, even desperate. But when someone speaks with patience, letting silence stretch between words, people listen. They assume that if you're willing to take your time, what you're saying must be worth the wait. Psychologists studying communication patterns found that slower speakers were consistently rated as more intelligent, confident, and persuasive than those who raced. The content was the same. The difference was rhythm. Quick speech signals urgency. Slow speech signals control. Think of the leaders you've heard. The professor who never hurried through a lecture but instead gave every sentence room to breathe. The storyteller who drew you in with long pauses, making silence part of the tale. The negotiator who waited just long enough for the other side to fill the gap with nervous words. None of them shouted. Their power came from pace. And here's the hidden effect. Slowing down doesn't only change how you sound, it changes how others feel. People unconsciously match rhythm. When you slow your words, they slow their thoughts. Their breath eases, their attention sharpens, their focus settles on you. That's why slowing down works like authority. It's not the loudest voice that commands the room. It's the one that refuses to race, that speaks as if every word is deliberate, every pause intentional. So when you want your message to carry weight, resist the rush. Let your words walk, not sprint. Because in the end, people don't just hear the slow voice, they believe it. Lower your voice at the end, it feels final. Say the sentence, "We'll talk tomorrow." Now say it again, letting your voice fall at the end. "We'll talk tomorrow." The words are almost the same, but the feeling isn't. The first sounds uncertain, like you're asking permission. The second feels certain, already decided. That's the quiet influence of a downward inflection. Linguists and psychologists have studied how pitch shapes perception. Rising tones make us think of questions, of unfinished business, of a speaker still seeking approval. Falling tones, by contrast, signal closure. They sound like confidence, authority, finality. The shift is subtle, but the brain notices it instantly. You've heard it in leaders. Military commanders never give orders on a rising pitch. A negotiator who ends a proposal with a downward tone sounds more persuasive, less open to debate. Even in everyday conversations, that drop at the end of a sentence makes people nod, as if the matter is already settled. It works because we've been trained for centuries to hear falling notes as endings. In music, melodies resolve downward. In speech, a sinking tone tells us the thought is complete. When your voice falls, the listener's mind follows. They feel less inclined to argue, more inclined to accept. So the next time you want your words to land with weight, focus less on what you're saying and more on how it ends. Lower your voice, even slightly, and let it rest there. Because sometimes the difference between a suggestion and a decision is nothing more than the way it falls. Let them correct you, they'll feel superior. Most of us spend our lives trying not to be wrong. We polish our facts, double-check our dates, rehearse details so no one can catch us slipping. But here's the paradox. Being corrected can actually make people like you more. Psychologists call this the ego boost effect. When someone points out your mistake, they don't just fix the error, they feel sharper, smarter, a little more capable. That burst of pride doesn't stay with them, it reshapes how they see you. Instead of disliking you for the slip, they like you for giving them the chance to shine. Teachers sometimes use this deliberately. They'll write a small error on the board, waiting for a student to catch it. The student beams, the class admires them, and the teacher quietly earns trust for creating that moment. You see it in conversations too. Someone corrects you on a date, a name, a statistic. They walk away not resentful, but satisfied, because you gave them proof they were paying attention, that they knew something you didn't. It works because the mind hates contradictions. If I corrected you, it must mean I was engaged. If I helped you, it must mean I cared. The action itself becomes evidence of connection. So instead of fearing mistakes, recognize their hidden value. Sometimes letting someone correct you is more powerful than being flawless. Because in that instant, they don't just feel smarter, they feel invested in you, and people tend to like the ones who make them feel that way. Ask what would you do, not why. There's a difference between asking someone why and asking them what they would do. At first, it seems subtle, but the response it draws out couldn't be more different. When you ask, why did you do that, the brain goes on the defensive. It feels like judgment, as though you're demanding justification. People scramble for excuses, rationalizations, anything to protect themselves. The wall goes up. But when you ask, what would you do, something else happens. The defensive guard lowers. Instead of feeling accused, the person feels included, invited to problem solve with you. Their brain shifts from protecting themselves to imagining possibilities. And with that shift, you gain not just information, but cooperation. Psychologists studying interview techniques have shown that open, forward-looking questions make people more willing to share, and more honest when they do. Police negotiators know it. Therapists know it. Skilled leaders know it. The framing of the question shapes not only the answer, but the emotional tone of the entire exchange. Think of the last time someone asked you why. Chances are, it made you tense. Now think of when someone asked what you'd do. It felt like an opening, not a corner. That small change in words transforms resistance into reflection. The next time you want someone to reveal more or to step into your perspective, don't push them back with why. Pull them forward with, what would you do? Because the questions we ask don't just unlock answers, they unlock cooperation. Delay answering, people fill in the gaps. Conversation moves quickly. Someone asks you a question and you feel the pull to answer right away. But if you resist that pull, if you let the silence stretch, something interesting happens. People start to fill the space for you. Psychologists studying dialogue patterns have found that most people can only tolerate a few seconds of silence before discomfort sets in. The mind hates unfinished business. When your answer doesn't come immediately, the other person often rushes to bridge the gap, adding clarifications, softening demands, sometimes even revealing more than they intended. Negotiators use this instinct constantly. A buyer names a price, then waits. The seller, unable to bear the quiet, often lowers it before the pause is broken. Interviewers know it too. A candidate answers, the silence lingers, and suddenly they keep talking, revealing details they hadn't planned to share. You've probably seen this in everyday life. A friend tells a story, then stops. You say nothing, and without prompting, they start again, filling the quiet with extra layers of truth. The trick works because silence feels like pressure. We're wired to resolve it, even if it means giving away more than we should. Now, when you're asked something important, resist the reflex to answer instantly. Let the silence breathe. Watch as the other person rushes to fill it. Because sometimes the most revealing words aren't the ones you speak. They're the ones spoken into the spaces you leave empty. Use their words, not yours. There's a strange comfort in hearing your own words repeated back to you. It feels like proof that the other person understands, that they're not just hearing, but listening. And that's exactly why using someone's words instead of your own can bend the direction of a conversation. Psychologists call this verbal mirroring. In experiments, people rated conversations as warmer and more persuasive when their own phrasing was reflected back to them. The effect wasn't in the content, it was in the familiarity. Hearing your own language creates trust because it feels like agreement. You can see this everywhere. A customer says, "I'm worried about the cost." A skilled salesperson doesn't reply with jargon. They say, "I hear you're worried about the cost." A friend says, "I'm stressed about time." You answer, "Time has been stressful for you." It's simple, but it works. Their own words become a bridge back to them. This happens because our minds lean toward what feels familiar. Words we've spoken ourselves already carry emotional weight. When they're handed back, it feels like recognition, not manipulation. And recognition makes people open up, agree, and connect more easily. It's a reminder that persuasion doesn't always come from new ideas. Sometimes it comes from giving people their own ideas back, shaped just enough to guide the direction you want. Because when they hear their own words echoed, they stop resisting. They feel understood. And once someone feels understood, they're far more likely to follow. Tell them they're free, they'll obey more. It sounds backward, but telling someone they don't have to do something often makes them more likely to do it. A request that ends with, "but of course, it's your choice," feels lighter, less threatening, and strangely, harder to refuse. Psychologists call this the "but you are free" effect. In experiments, researchers found that when a request for help or money included the reminder that participants were free to say no, compliance nearly doubled. The words don't change the request itself, they change how it feels. We resist being cornered. When people sense pressure, their instinct is to pull back, to protect autonomy. But when freedom is acknowledged, resistance dissolves. Saying you're free to decide removes the wall, and what's left is willingness. You've seen this at work in daily life. A friend says, "You should come to dinner, but it's totally up to you." Suddenly, you're leaning toward yes. A salesperson adds, "Of course you're free to walk away." The pressure fades, but the choice feels easier to make, in their favor. It works because control matters more than outcome. People want to feel they decided for themselves, even if they ended up exactly where you wanted them to be. That's why this trick endures. By reminding someone they're free, you don't weaken your request, you strengthen it. Because the surest way to guide someone isn't by forcing their hand. It's by letting them believe the choice was always theirs. Speak less than them, you'll win influence. In conversation, silence can feel like weakness. We rush to fill it, stacking words on words, believing that the more we say, the more persuasive we'll be. But the opposite is often true. The person who speaks less usually ends up with more control. Psychologists studying persuasion have noted that people assign authority not to the one who talks the most, but to the one who listens. Speaking less creates space, and space pulls others in. When you let someone talk, they reveal more than they intended. They justify themselves, expose their reasoning, sometimes even argue in ways that make your position stronger without realizing it. You've seen this in negotiations. The quiet buyer who nods but says little often gets the better price, while the seller talks themselves into concessions. In interviews, candidates who pause and let silence stretch sometimes make the panel sell the job to them. Even in friendships, the best listeners aren't the ones who speak often, but the ones who leave room for the other person's words to grow. It works because silence is magnetic. When you don't fill the space, others rush to fill it for you. And when they do, they walk away feeling understood, even if you said very little at all. Influence doesn't always come from having the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it comes from having the quietest, the one that lets everyone else talk until they forget whose idea was whose. Tell them they're good at it, they'll prove you right. There's a strange pull in being told you're good at something. Even if you doubt it, even if you've never thought about it before, part of you feels the urge to live up to those words. Psychologists call this the Pygmalion effect, when expectations, even casual ones, shape performance. One classic study followed teachers who were told that certain students had unusual potential. In reality, those students were chosen at random. But by the end of the year, they outperformed their peers. The teachers, believing they were gifted, gave them more attention, more patience, more encouragement, and the students rose to match the belief. The same effect happens everywhere. Tell a child they're a great storyteller, and watch them invent more elaborate tales. Tell a coworker they're brilliant at problem solving, and see them step forward in the next challenge. Even strangers react this way. When you say someone seems confident, they'll often start acting that way, if only to stay consistent with your view of them. It works because no one wants to create dissonance between who they are and who they're seen to be. When someone paints us in a flattering light, we bend ourselves, consciously or not, to fit that reflection. That's the hidden power of this trick. You don't just describe people, you shape them. And once they prove your words true, they don't just feel good about themselves. They feel good about you for recognizing it. Your brothers and sisters or the people you love might just need a little nudge. Mention what most people do, they'll follow. Human beings like to believe we make decisions independently, guided by reason and preference. But beneath that belief lies something older, stronger, the pull of the crowd. When we hear what most people are doing, our instincts push us to fall in line, often without realizing it. Psychologists call this social proof. In one classic experiment, hotel guests were encouraged to reuse towels. Signs that simply said, "Help save the environment," had modest impact. But when the sign said, "Most guests reuse their towels," compliance shot up. Nothing about the towels changed. only the sense that others were already doing it. You see it everywhere. Online stores label items as bestsellers. Restaurants brag about most popular dishes. Even in politics, phrases like "the majority agrees" carry weight, nudging people toward conformity. It doesn't matter whether the crowd is real or imagined. What matters is the suggestion that everyone else is already on board. This instinct is ancient. In small tribes, survival depended on moving with the group. To stray was dangerous. Our nervous system still echoes that logic, rewarding us with comfort when we align, punishing us with unease when we resist. That's why this trick works so easily. By mentioning what most people do, you don't just share information. You tap into a survival code written deep in the brain. And once that code is triggered, resistance feels risky. Agreement feels safe. Use an open body, they'll feel safe. Long before words, there was posture. Our ancestors didn't need language to know whether someone was a friend or a threat. They looked at the way a body stood, shoulders tight, arms crossed, fists clenched, or relaxed, open, and welcoming. That instinct is still with us today. Psychologists studying nonverbal communication have shown that open body language consistently makes others feel more comfortable. Uncrossed arms, palms visible, torso facing the person you're speaking to, these signals are processed faster than words. The brain reads them as signs of safety, honesty, and approachability. Think about how different it feels to talk to someone whose arms are folded versus someone who gestures freely. One feels guarded, the other feels present. Even small shifts matter, leaning slightly forward instead of back, keeping hands visible instead of hidden. These cues reassure the nervous system that no danger is near, lowering tension before a single sentence is spoken. You see it in leaders who open their stance to connect with a crowd, in teachers who gesture broadly to make students feel included, in friends who uncross their arms when they want the conversation to go deeper. It works because the body speaks before the mouth does. People often decide how much they trust you before they've heard your words, guided entirely by the shape you hold. That's why open posture matters. It doesn't just make you look confident, it makes others feel safe. And when people feel safe, they're far more likely to listen, to trust, and to follow where you lead. Give a reason to say yes, even a dumb one. It was the 1970s when psychologists tried something odd. At a busy library, a researcher asked people if they could cut in line for the photocopier. When the request was simple, "May I use the machine?" about 6 out of 10 agreed. But when the request added a reason, "May I use the machine because I'm in a rush?" almost everyone said yes. Here's the twist. When the reason was nonsense, "May I use the machine because I have to make copies?" compliance still shot up. The reason didn't matter. The word "because" did. Our brains love shortcuts. When we hear "because," we stop evaluating and start complying. The presence of a reason, even a dumb one, is enough to push us toward yes. You see it all the time. Because it's policy. Because everyone's doing it. Because that's just how it works. None of these explanations mean anything, but they silence resistance. The structure of a reason matters more than the content. This trick slips into sales pitches, workplace demands, even casual requests. Add a "because" and the odds tilt in your favor. That's the secret. People don't need a perfect justification to say yes. They just need something that sounds like one. And once they hear it, they often stop questioning. So if you want to increase agreement, don't just ask. Give them a reason, even a flimsy one. Because the human brain doesn't always care about truth. It cares that there's a "because." Tell them you shouldn't tell them, then say it. There's a phrase that unlocks attention faster than almost anything else. "I probably shouldn't tell you this." The moment those words are spoken, the air shifts. Curiosity sharpens. The listener leans in. Whatever follows feels charged, dangerous, irresistible. Psychologists who study persuasion call this the secrecy effect. Information framed as restricted or confidential feels more valuable than the same information given plainly. When something is not for everyone, it bypasses skepticism. It doesn't matter if the secret is small. The framing alone makes it feel rare, intimate, important. You've seen this in gossip. A story becomes more exciting when it's whispered behind a hand. You see it in marketing too. Phrases like "insider tip," "limited access," or "only a few people know this" spark demand. The human brain treats scarcity of information the same way it treats scarcity of goods. it craves it more. The trick works because people want to be on the inside. When you tell someone you shouldn't be saying something, you invite them into a private circle, even if the circle is imaginary. And once they're inside, they feel trust, connection, even loyalty. That's why this technique is powerful and a little dangerous, because the more someone believes you've shared what wasn't meant to be shared, the more they'll value both the secret and the person who trusted them with it. It's a reminder that sometimes the fastest way to make words matter isn't by proving their truth, it's by making them forbidden. Frame it like a secret, they'll listen closer. Lower your voice, lean in, say the words, "I'll tell you something, but just between us." Suddenly, the world around you fades. The person across from you straightens, eyes narrowing, attention sharpening. It doesn't matter if the thing you're about to say is small. The moment you frame it as a secret, it feels bigger. Psychologists studying persuasion call this the exclusivity effect. Information that feels hidden or restricted is rated as more valuable than the same information given openly. It's not the content that matters, it's the frame. The suggestion that this isn't for everyone makes the brain cling to it harder. You've seen it in gossip. A trivial story feels magnetic once it's whispered. You've seen it in marketing. Members only, exclusive access, for your eyes only. Even in politics, leaks and behind-the-scenes details are devoured faster than official announcements. This works because humans are wired to crave what's hidden. Secrets create intimacy. When someone frames information as private, we feel chosen, set apart, trusted. That feeling of being an insider binds us to the speaker, whether or not the secret itself is important. And that's the power in this technique. People don't remember everything you say, but they remember the things you made feel like secrets. Because when something is framed as private, it doesn't just stick in their mind, it sticks to you. So if you want someone to lean closer, don't just give them information, wrap it in secrecy. Because the things we whisper always echo louder than the things we shout. Act slightly distracted, they'll chase your attention. You've seen it before. Someone speaks to you, but their gaze drifts past your shoulder, or they glance down at their phone for a moment. Instantly, you lean forward, your voice tightens, and without thinking, you try harder to pull them back. Their distraction makes you want their attention even more. Psychologists studying social dynamics call this the scarcity of attention. The less of it we feel we're getting, the more valuable it becomes. People don't chase what comes freely, they chase what feels just out of reach. This effect shows up everywhere. In dating, the person who seems a little less available often becomes the one everyone wants. In sales, the customer treated with casual indifference sometimes pushes harder to prove their interest. Even children instinctively sense it. When a parent is fully present, they wander off. When a parent looks away, they cling tighter. It works because the human mind is wired to seek validation. A wandering eye or a delayed response sparks doubt, and doubt pulls us forward. We want to close the gap, to win back what feels like it's slipping away. The trick isn't rudeness, it's subtlety. Too much indifference and people walk away. But just enough distraction, just enough distance, can turn ordinary attention into something others fight to earn. And that's the strange power here. Sometimes you don't capture people by giving them more. You capture them by giving them just less than they expect, enough to keep them reaching. The 5:1 ratio rule. Relationships don't collapse from a single argument. They collapse from imbalance. Psychologist John Gottman studied couples for decades and discovered a striking pattern. Stable, happy relationships share at least 5 positive interactions for every one negative. A smile, a touch, a kind word. 5 to balance each criticism, complaint, or sigh. This is the 5:1 ratio rule. The math isn't exact for every relationship, but the principle is clear. Negativity is heavier than positivity. One insult cuts deeper than one compliment can heal, which means harmony isn't built on avoiding conflict, but on stacking enough good moments to outweigh the bad. Manipulators know this too. They can poison a bond with a trickle of criticism, knowing each negative weighs more. Or, just as easily, they can flood someone with positive reinforcement, overwhelming doubts before slipping in a single sharp remark. But you can use this rule to strengthen bonds. If you must criticize, balance it with gestures of warmth. If you want loyalty, build it not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent positives. Remembering a detail, praising effort, showing gratitude. That's the secret. It's not about perfection, it's about ratio. And once you understand how much heavier the bad is than the good, you'll never underestimate the power of a single smile or the damage of a single careless word. Bring something in your hand. First impressions are fragile. Research shows people decide how they feel about you within seconds of meeting, and one subtle trick can tilt those seconds in your favor. Walk in holding something, a book, a coffee, a notepad, anything at all. Psychologists studying first impressions have found that objects change perception. Someone carrying coffee looks approachable. Someone with a book looks intelligent. Even a clipboard can lend authority, as if the person holding it must have a role, a purpose, a reason to be there. It works because the brain loves shortcuts. Instead of judging you fully, it glances at the prop and builds a story around it. The object becomes part of your identity before you've spoken a word. You've seen this everywhere. Speakers walk on stage with papers in hand even when they don't use them. Business people carry folders they never open. Celebrities step out with a signature drink or accessory that becomes part of their brand. The trick is simple but powerful. Objects make you look less empty, less exposed. They anchor attention, give context, and shape impressions. And in a room full of uncertainty, those first seconds matter more than the minutes that follow. That's why walking in with something matters. You're not just entering the room, you're carrying a story, one the audience will start believing before you even say your name. Use the spotlight effect to own a room. You walk into a room and feel every eye on you. Every stumble, every wrinkle, every awkward glance feels magnified, as if a spotlight is shining on your flaws. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect, the tendency to vastly overestimate how much other people notice us. The truth? Most people are too focused on themselves to scrutinize you. They don't see the stain on your shirt or the tremble in your voice the way you think they do. Their spotlight is on their own stage. Here's where it gets powerful. Once you realize the spotlight effect is an illusion, you can flip it. Instead of shrinking, act as though the room really is watching. Stand taller, move deliberately, speak with presence. People will follow your energy, not your fear. Leaders, performers, and speakers know this instinctively. By leaning into the imagined spotlight, they create real influence. A pause feels intentional. A gesture feels commanding. Confidence becomes contagious, not because others were judging in the first place, but because you gave them something to notice. The spotlight effect reminds us of a strange truth. People notice less than we fear, but more than we believe when we project strength. That gap is where power lives. So if you want to own a room, stop hiding from the spotlight you think is there. Step into it. Because once you act as though it's shining on you, it will. Love bombing and withdrawal. At first, it feels like perfection. Messages every morning, compliments flooding every conversation, gifts, promises, an intensity that seems too good to be real. That's the front half of the cycle, the love bomb. It's overwhelming by design. The flood of affection lowers defenses, creating a rush of connection so strong it feels like destiny. But then, without warning, it stops. The message is slow. The praise fades. The attention that once seemed endless is pulled away. That absence creates panic. The same person who felt adored now feels abandoned, and the mind scrambles to get the warmth back. This is the trap. Withdrawal makes the victim work harder for the reward, clinging to the relationship even as it becomes toxic. Psychologists studying abusive dynamics call this intermittent reinforcement. Rewards delivered inconsistently, sometimes flooding, sometimes withheld, create the strongest attachments. It's the same principle behind gambling addiction. Wins that arrive unpredictably hook deeper than steady ones. You see it in toxic relationships, in cults, even in manipulative friendships. The sudden shift from abundance to absence keeps people chasing what they once had, unable to see the manipulation underneath. That's what makes this tactic so dangerous. It doesn't just play with emotions, it rewires dependence. Once someone experiences the high of being love-bombed, they'll often endure the lows of withdrawal just for the chance to feel it again. And that's the cruel brilliance of the cycle. The person pulling the strings doesn't need to give more. They just need to give less, enough to make you desperate for the flood to return. Gaslighting reality distortion. It begins small, a forgotten word, a detail twisted. You're told you misheard, that you remembered wrong, you laugh it off, certain of yourself. But over time, the corrections pile up. The doubts settle in. Eventually, you don't trust your own memory anymore. You start to believe theirs instead. That's gaslighting. The slow distortion of reality until your own perception feels unreliable. The term comes from a 1944 film, Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife by dimming the lamps in their home, then denying anything has changed. She begins to question her sanity, even as her senses scream the truth. Psychologists adopted the word because the same tactic appears in abusive relationships, controlling families, manipulative workplaces, and even politics. Gaslighting works because memory and perception are fragile. Most of us are willing to doubt ourselves before doubting someone we trust or depend on. When someone insists with confidence that events happened differently, or didn't happen at all, the mind wavers. The more it happens, the more the target relies on the manipulator as their anchor of truth. The damage goes deeper than confusion. Gaslighting erodes identity itself. If you can't trust your own memories, you can't trust your judgment. And once that trust is broken, you're far easier to control. That's why gaslighting is one of the darkest tricks in psychology. It doesn't just change how you see reality. It convinces you that reality itself can't be trusted. And when that belief takes hold, the manipulator doesn't just win the argument, they win the world you live in. Triangulation in relationships. You notice it when someone brings a third person into a conflict that should only involve two. Instead of speaking directly to you, they compare you, measure you, pit you against someone else. This is triangulation, a manipulation tactic that turns communication into competition. Psychologists describe it as a way of maintaining power. By adding a third point to the relationship, the manipulator keeps control at the center. In families, it might be a parent comparing one child against the other. In friendships, it might be a person saying, "Well, Sarah agrees with me." In romance, it could be invoking an ex, a co-worker, or even a stranger, not for truth, but for leverage. Triangulation works because it strikes at our need for validation. Being compared makes us insecure, and insecurity drives us to prove ourselves. Instead of questioning the manipulator, we try harder to regain favor, to win back what was shifted towards someone else. The triangle locks us in, always chasing the approval of the one holding the angles together. You can see it in workplaces too. A manager plays employees off each other, saying one team is performing better, pushing the others to compete. The energy shifts away from questioning leadership and toward proving worth. The danger is that triangulation feels invisible when you're inside it. You feel urgency, jealousy, or competition, but not the strings being pulled. That's the hidden cruelty of this tactic. It doesn't just distort relationships, it turns people into rivals, forcing them to fight for a balance that was never theirs to control. Silent treatment as control. You send a message. No reply. You call. Nothing. Hours pass, then days. The silence grows heavier than words ever could. This isn't forgetting. It isn't being busy. This is silence as strategy. The silent treatment, used not to withdraw, but to control. Psychologists define it as a form of emotional manipulation. By cutting off communication, the silent partner creates imbalance. The other person scrambles for resolution, replaying every word, every action, searching for the mistake. The silence says, "You are beneath response until you fix what I won't name." It works because humans are wired to crave social connection. Rejection or exclusion triggers the same pain, centers in the brain as physical injury. Prolonged silence feels like punishment, and punishment pushes behavior. People bend, apologize, change, not because they understand, but because they want the silence to end. The tactic appears in toxic relationships, friendships, even workplaces. A partner shuts down to gain the upper hand. A parent withdraws affection to enforce obedience. A manager ices out an employee until they conform. In each case, silence is not absence. It is presence wielded like a blade. The danger lies in its invisibility. To outsiders, nothing seems to happen. But to the one inside, the weight is crushing. That's why the silent treatment is so powerful. It doesn't shout, it doesn't strike, it simply withholds. And in that void, the target begins to shape themselves into whatever form will bring the sound of a voice back. Intermittent reinforcement addiction. Imagine pulling a slot machine. Most spins lose, some win small, A few deliver jackpots that keep you hooked for hours. This is intermittent reinforcement. Rewards given inconsistently, unpredictably. And it creates the strongest form of attachment known in psychology. Researchers discovered this decades ago with lab animals. Rats pressing a lever for food became more obsessed when rewards came at random intervals. Steady rewards created boredom. Uncertain rewards created compulsion. The same pattern drives gambling addiction, compulsive gaming, and even the endless scroll of social media feeds. You never know when the reward, a like, a win, a message, will appear. But the darkest use of intermittent reinforcement isn't in casinos or apps, it's in human relationships. One day, there's affection, praise, warmth. The next, withdrawal, silence, indifference. The unpredictability keeps the target desperate, clinging, waiting for the next hit of approval. And because they can't predict when it will come, they work harder to earn it. This cycle is intoxicating because the brain learns that every small reward means hope. And hope, especially when rare, is addictive. Victims of manipulation often say they stayed because of the good days. But it's the randomness of those days that made leaving so hard. That's why intermittent reinforcement is so powerful. Consistency builds comfort. Inconsistency builds obsession. And once someone is caught in that loop, it isn't the size of the reward that matters. It's the uncertainty. Because when you don't know when the next high is coming, you'll endure almost anything to feel it again. Trauma bonding creation. It begins with intensity. Affection, praise, promises of loyalty. Then comes the opposite, criticism, withdrawal, even cruelty. The cycle repeats, kindness followed by pain, comfort followed by chaos. Over time, the victim doesn't pull away, they hold on tighter. That's the paradox of trauma bonding. Psychologists define trauma bonds as emotional attachments formed through cycles of abuse and intermittent reward. The very person who inflicts harm also becomes the one who relieves it. The brain, desperate for safety, starts to see the abuser as both the source of pain and the source of comfort. Breaking free feels impossible because the attachment is wired into survival instincts. This shows up in toxic relationships, manipulative families, cults, and even workplaces. A partner lashes out, then apologizes with affection so intense it feels like redemption. A leader punishes, then offers praise that feels life-saving. The victim becomes trapped in the hope of the next good moment, even as the bad ones pile higher. The power of trauma bonding lies in confusion. The victim can't separate the love from the pain, the rescuer from the abuser. Instead, they internalize the cycle as proof that the relationship is worth saving. They believe the bond is unique, unbreakable, when in reality, it is a cage. That's why trauma bonds are so difficult to escape. They're not held together by logic or love, but by fear, reward, and the desperate hope that the kindness will return. And until that cycle is broken, the bond only tightens. Emotional blackmail patterns. It doesn't sound like a threat at first. It sounds like love or loyalty or disappointment. If you cared about me, you'd do this. After everything I've done for you, how could you say no? The words aren't shouted, but the meaning is clear. Obey or pay the emotional price. This is emotional blackmail, a system of control built on guilt, fear, and obligation. Psychologist Susan Forward, who first described the pattern, broke it into 4 parts. First comes the demand, something the manipulator wants. Then resistance, the target hesitates. That's when pressure begins. Threats, guilt trips, or playing the victim. Finally, submission. The target gives in, not out of agreement, but out of exhaustion. The cycle is powerful because it attacks core human needs. We want to be loved. We want to avoid conflict. We want to protect our bonds. Emotional blackmail exploits all 3 at once. Instead of debating facts, it ties compliance to identity. If you don't do this, you're cruel, ungrateful, selfish. You'll find it in relationships where one partner uses tears or withdrawal to get their way. In families where guilt becomes the currency of control. Even in workplaces where loyalty is manipulated with phrases like, "Don't let the team down." The cruelty of emotional blackmail is that it doesn't need force. It convinces the target to imprison themselves, choosing guilt over freedom. And that's why it works. Because when love, fear, and obligation are woven into the same knot, most people will pull tighter, not realizing they've tied the rope around their own neck. Guilt-tripping frameworks. Few tools of manipulation are as quiet and effective as guilt. It doesn't shout, it doesn't push, it whispers, "After all I've done for you, you never think about how much I sacrifice." With a single phrase, the balance of the relationship tilts. You stop thinking about what's fair and start thinking about how to escape the weight placed on you. Psychologists describe guilt-tripping as a way to control behavior by attaching moral debt to everyday choices. The manipulator frames themselves as the victim and you as the selfish one. It doesn't matter if the request is unreasonable. Once guilt enters, resistance feels like cruelty. This shows up everywhere. A parent sighs, "I guess I'll just sit here alone since you're too busy." A partner says, "If you loved me, you'd do this." A colleague frames work as sacrifice. "I stayed late last night, so you should handle this today." None of these are arguments, they're traps. The reason it works is simple. Humans are wired for fairness. When accused of selfishness, most people overcorrect, giving in just to prove they're not the monster the other person suggests. That's why guilt is such a powerful hook. It uses our own conscience against us. And here's the dangerous part. The manipulator doesn't need to repeat it often. One sharp guilt trip can keep someone doubting themselves for days. That's why guilt tripping works like quicksand. The more you fight to prove you're good, the deeper you sink, playing the victim while being the aggressor. It's a strange inversion. The person who hurt you becomes the one demanding sympathy. They twist the story so their cruelty looks like suffering, their attack like self-defense. This is the manipulator's shield, playing the victim while being the aggressor. Psychologists studying toxic relationship patterns call this DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. The aggressor denies what they've done, attacks your credibility, then flips the roles. Suddenly, you're the one apologizing for hurting them, even as you sit with the wounds they created. This tactic is powerful because it targets empathy. Most people don't want to see themselves as cruel. When accused of causing pain, even unfairly, we pause, we doubt, we soften. And in that pause, the manipulator escapes accountability. You'll see it in relationships where someone lashes out, then says, "I only act this way because you push me." In workplaces where a boss bullies but claims they're being disrespected. Even in politics, where those in power paint themselves as persecuted by the very people they dominate. The trick works because it confuses the narrative. If the aggressor is the victim, then who's left to blame? The target. And once you've accepted guilt that isn't yours, the manipulator has already won. That's the hidden danger. By claiming victimhood, aggressors don't just dodge responsibility. They weaponize compassion itself, and in doing so, they make you feel sorry for the very person who's breaking you down. Use humor first, logic later. Laughter opens doors that arguments can't. When people laugh, their defenses drop. Tension dissolves, attention sharpens, and for a brief moment, they're with you, not against you. That's why some of the best persuaders start with humor before moving to reason. Psychologists studying persuasion call this affective priming. Positive emotions change the way we process information. A joke, even a small one, warms the brain's reception. Once someone's smiling, they're more willing to listen, more open to agreeing, and less likely to resist. Think of skilled speakers. They don't launch into data and bullet points right away. They crack a joke, share a funny story, or make a playful observation. The audience relaxes, leans in, and only then do they weave in the facts. Humor is the hook. Logic is the line. You see it in sales too. A light-hearted comment makes the pitch feel less like pressure and more like a conversation. In relationships, a joke can diffuse an argument, making space for reason to slip in afterward. Even in negotiations, humor reframes tension, turning adversaries into collaborators, if only for a moment. The trick works because humor isn't just distraction, it builds connection. It says, "I understand you, I can make you feel good." And once someone associates you with that feeling, your reasoning carries more weight than it would on its own. That's the hidden power here. You don't win people over by starting with logic. You win them with laughter. And once they've laughed, the logic feels like their own conclusion. Manufactured jealousy tactics. Jealousy is a powerful emotion. It burns fast, it cuts deep, and it clouds judgment. Manipulators know this, which is why some deliberately create jealousy, not by accident, but by design. Psychologists call it provoked jealousy, and it often appears in toxic relationships. A partner mentions an ex a little too often, flirts casually in front of you, or praises someone else just enough to sting. The goal isn't admiration, it's control. By sparking jealousy, they shift your focus from their behavior to your own insecurity. It works because jealousy hijacks the brain. Studies show that feelings of jealousy activate the same neural circuits tied to threat detection and survival. It pushes people into hypervigilance, into proving themselves worthy, into fighting for scraps of attention they should already have. Instead of questioning the manipulator, the target starts competing for their approval. This tactic shows up outside of romance too. In workplaces, leaders pit employees against each other with comparisons, breeding rivalry instead of unity. In friendships, someone may praise another friend in front of you to spark competition for closeness. Wherever it appears, the result is the same. Energy shifts away from examining the manipulator and toward fighting for their validation. That's why manufactured jealousy is so insidious. It doesn't just wound in the moment, it rewires behavior. It convinces you to work harder, give more, and demand less, all in the hope of silencing the insecurity that someone else carefully planted. The Barnum effect, vague statements seeming specific. You're the kind of person who values honesty, but sometimes you keep things to yourself. Hear that and you nod. Of course it feels true, but here's the secret. That sentence could fit almost anyone. It's not insight. It's a trick. Psychologists call it the Barnum effect. Vague, general statements that sound specific enough to feel personal. The name comes from showman P.T. Barnum, who once said there's a sucker born every minute. Psychologists proved him right. In a famous study, people were given personality descriptions supposedly tailored to them. In reality, everyone got the same generic text. You have a great need for others to like you. You tend to be critical of yourself. You have unused potential you haven't tapped into. Nearly everyone rated the description as highly accurate. You see this effect all the time. Fortune tellers use it. Horoscopes thrive on it. Even online personality quizzes recycle the same broad lines. You're sometimes shy, but can also be outgoing. The trick works because we fill in the blanks. We want to believe we've been seen, so we take vague truths and shape them into something that feels personal. And that's the power of the Barnum effect. With the right phrasing, you can make people feel understood without knowing them at all. It's a reminder of how hungry people are to feel recognized. And if you use this knowledge, you'll notice something unsettling. People don't need you to know everything about them. They just need you to sound like you do. Shotgunning, rapid-fire guesses. Imagine sitting across from a so-called psychic. They don't make one bold prediction. Instead, they fire off a scatter of guesses. I see a father figure, maybe an older man with health problems. I sense the name John or maybe James. There's a trip coming up, or at least a big change. You latch onto the parts that fit and quietly ignore the ones that don't. That's shotgunning, the art of rapid-fire guessing until something sticks. Psychologists studying cold reading have shown how effective this trick can be. The human mind is built to search for meaning, to make connections. When we hear a stream of possibilities, we filter for relevance. The moment one feels true, we stop and say, yes, that's it. In that instant, the speaker looks gifted, when in fact it was probability all along. You've seen versions of this outside of fortune-telling. A salesperson tossing out product benefits until one makes you nod. A manipulator listing vague complaints until you defend yourself against the one that lands. Even in casual conversation, people sometimes use rapid guesses to create the illusion of closeness. The secret of shotgunning isn't accuracy, it's volume. By spraying enough statements, at least one will feel targeted, and the brain does the rest of the work, editing out the misses, celebrating the hit. That's why this trick works. People don't remember how many times you were wrong. They remember the one time you seemed right. And that single moment of truth can be enough to make them believe you knew all along. Rainbow ruse covering all possibilities. You're usually confident, but sometimes you doubt yourself. You can be outgoing, but you also enjoy time alone. At first, these statements sound insightful. They feel balanced, nuanced, almost like someone sees the whole of who you are. But look closer. They're covering all possibilities. That's the rainbow ruse. A cold reading technique designed to make vague observations seem profound. Psychologists studying persuasion note that people are more likely to accept a description if it flatters them while leaving room for contradiction. The rainbow ruse does both at once. It's like throwing a wide net. No matter what, some part of the statement will fit. Fortune tellers use it constantly. A psychic might say, "You're kind, but you don't let people take advantage of you." That line works on nearly anyone. In reality, most people are sometimes kind and sometimes firm, but framed as a special observation, it feels personal.
This tactic works because humans crave recognition. We want to feel understood, and we forgive the contradictions if the core feels flattering. Our brains smooth out the inconsistencies and highlight the parts that resonate.
You'll hear versions of this outside of fortune telling too. Personality tests, horoscopes, even sales pitches. Each one sprinkles in opposites so everyone can nod along, convinced the message was tailored just for them. That's the subtle danger of the rainbow ruse. It doesn't just trick people into believing you understand them, it makes them grateful for it. And once someone feels understood, they're far more likely to trust, follow, and obey. The Forer effect exploitation. In 1948, psychologist Bertram Forer gave his students what he claimed were individualized personality profiles based on a test they'd taken. The students read their reports carefully, nodding along, and then rated their accuracy. On average, they gave them a score of 4.3 out of 5. The twist? Every student had been given the exact same description. That's the Forer effect, the tendency to accept vague, general statements as uniquely true about ourselves. Lines like, "You have a strong need for others to like you," or "You can be critical of yourself, but you know you have great untapped potential." These are broad enough to apply to almost anyone, yet specific enough to feel intimate. This effect is the foundation of horoscopes, fortune-telling, and countless personality quizzes. It works because people naturally search for themselves in the words. We highlight the parts that resonate, ignore the parts that don't, and walk away convinced that we've been seen. The manipulation lies in how easily it creates trust. A stranger can feed you generic lines, and you'll do the rest of the work, filling in the blanks until the picture feels personal. Once you believe someone knows you, you're more likely to listen, to open up, to follow. That's why the Forer effect is so dangerous. It doesn't just trick people into believing false insight. It makes them eager for more. And once someone thinks you understand who they are, it doesn't take much to guide what they'll do next. Hot reading, researching targets beforehand. You walk into a psychic's tent. Before you've said a word, they tell you the name of a loved one, the street you grew up on, or a secret from your past. It feels impossible, supernatural even. But often, it isn't magic. It's hot reading, information gathered in advance, disguised as intuition. Psychologists studying cold and hot reading note the difference clearly. Cold reading relies on guesswork and vague statements. Hot reading uses real facts, quietly researched ahead of time. A fortune teller might overhear you in line. A so-called medium might scan your social media. A manipulator might talk to your friends before talking to you. Then, in the moment, they present those details as if they came from nowhere. The trick works because of surprise. When someone tells you something they shouldn't know, your brain doesn't assume research. It assumes insight. That shock collapses your defenses. If they know this, you think, what else must they know? You see it in staged performances, in cons, even in relationships where someone guesses personal details they learned elsewhere. The power isn't in the fact itself, but in how it's delivered, as revelation, not information. And that's the danger. Hot reading makes trust feel unavoidable. Once someone demonstrates knowledge of your private life, you stop questioning and start believing. That's why manipulators use it. Not because it's magic, but because it feels like magic. And in that moment of awe, you become easier to persuade, easier to follow, easier to control. Body language phishing. Sometimes you don't need to ask questions to get answers. You just need to throw out a guess and watch the reaction. A flicker of the eyes, a shift in posture, the pause before a reply. The body gives away what the mouth won't. That's body language phishing, using subtle guesses and reading the response to reel in the truth. Magicians and con artists use this constantly. They might say, "You're thinking of someone important to you, maybe a man." If the target nods or even hesitates, the guesser locks in. If they frown, the guess pivots. Each micro-reaction acts like a breadcrumb, guiding the way forward until the guesser seems impossibly accurate. Psychologists note that humans are wired to leak information. Even when we try to stay neutral, tiny signals slip through. Dilation of the pupils, tightening of the jaw, a nervous laugh. A skilled observer doesn't need certainty. They just need enough hints to adjust their guess until it feels right. You've probably seen versions of this in everyday life. Someone says, "You must be tired," and your sigh confirms it. Or a coworker says, "You don't look convinced," and your body betrays you with the smallest shrug. The trick works not because the speaker knows, but because your body tells them. That's why body language phishing feels uncanny when you're on the receiving end. It makes someone seem insightful, when really they're just letting your body do the talking. Confirmation bias exploitation. We like to think we see the world as it is. In truth, we see the world as we expect it to be. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, notice, and remember information that confirms what we already believe, while ignoring what contradicts it. And manipulators know exactly how to use it. In one experiment, participants were asked to judge whether people who took a certain test were extroverted. When told to look for signs of extroversion, they found them everywhere. When told to look for signs of introversion, they spotted those instead. The same people, the same behaviors, but filtered through a biased lens. This bias shapes everything: politics, relationships, even small daily choices. A partner who expects neglect will see proof of it in every late text. A manager convinced of an employee's laziness will interpret effort as insufficient. The belief comes first. The evidence is stitched together afterward. That's why manipulators love confirmation bias. They don't have to convince you of something entirely new. They only have to give you fragments that align with what you already suspect. Once that seed is planted, your own mind does the rest, filling in gaps, ignoring contradictions, building a fortress of proof around the original idea. And that's the danger. When someone knows your fears, your doubts, or your hopes, they don't need to argue with you. They just need to feed your bias. Because once you're convinced you've discovered the truth on your own, you'll defend it more fiercely than if they'd ever told you outright. The clever Hans phenomenon. At the turn of the 20th century, a horse in Berlin amazed crowds. His name was Clever Hans, and he seemed to solve math problems. Ask him what 3 + 2 was, and Hans would tap his hoof 5 times. People gasped, convinced the animal was a genius. Scientists investigated, and for a while, even they couldn't find the trick. The truth was stranger than fraud. Hans wasn't calculating numbers. He was reading people. His owner and later the spectators would unconsciously tense as Hans tapped. When he reached the correct number, their bodies relaxed, a shift so subtle they didn't even know they were doing it. Hans would stop, and everyone believed he had the answer. Psychologists named this the clever Hans phenomenon, the tendency to give away information through unconscious cues and to mistake those responses as genuine knowledge. It shows up far beyond parlor tricks. In classrooms, teachers accidentally signal correct answers by their posture or tone. In negotiations, subtle nods or eye movements can reveal agreement before words are spoken. Even in experiments, researchers can unintentionally guide subjects without meaning to. The lesson is unsettling. We leak more than we think, and sharp observers don't need supernatural gifts to exploit it. They only need to notice the tiny signals we can't hide. That's why the clever Hans phenomenon matters. It reminds us that influence often works in silence, not through what we declare, but through what our bodies betray before we even realize we've spoken. Statement pumping techniques. Ask a direct question and people get cautious. They think about what to reveal, what to hide, how to frame their answer. But make a statement instead and watch what happens. If you're wrong, they'll rush to correct you. If you're right, they'll confirm it without hesitation. Either way, they give you more than they planned. This is statement pumping, the art of turning guesses into confessions. Psychologists studying interrogation methods have noted how powerful this trick can be. Instead of asking, "Were you at the office yesterday?" an investigator might say, "I know you were at the office yesterday." If the person wasn't, they'll quickly deny and provide an alibi. If they were, their silence or hesitation often gives them away. You've probably seen smaller versions of this in everyday life. Someone says, "You must be tired after that long day," and you admit you are. Or they say, You probably don't like this kind of food, and you respond with your true preference. The statement pushes you to reveal more than a question would. This works because humans are wired to correct inaccuracies. We can't resist setting the record straight. By making a confident statement, you create an opening where the truth comes out naturally. That's the subtle genius of statement pumping. You don't dig for information, you let people hand it to you, driven by their own need to be accurate. And the best part, they often leave thinking they gave nothing away at all. Time delay tricks in predictions. When someone tells your future, notice how rarely they give you a deadline. They don't say, "You'll meet someone tomorrow at noon." Instead, it's always, "Soon you'll meet someone important," or "In the next year, a big change is coming." That vagueness isn't laziness, it's strategy. Psychologists studying fortune-telling and cold reading call this the time delay trick. By stretching predictions across days, months, or years, the speaker gives themselves space to be right. If nothing happens immediately, the prophecy isn't disproven, it's simply waiting. And when something eventually does happen, no matter how loosely related, the mind connects it back to the prediction. This works because the brain hates loose ends. Once a suggestion is planted, we keep it alive, scanning for evidence to complete the story. A vague prediction lingers like an itch. When life eventually provides any event that fits, a move, a breakup, a new opportunity, we tie it back, saying, "They were right all along." It's the same trick horoscopes use. This month you'll face challenges but find strength. At some point, everyone stumbles, everyone recovers. The broad time frame guarantees accuracy. That's the quiet genius of the time delay. It doesn't need precision. It needs patience, because once a prediction hangs in the air long enough, your own life will eventually bend to meet it. Pretexting fake scenarios for information. Imagine getting a phone call from someone claiming to be from your bank. Their tone is professional, their questions casual. "We just need to confirm your details for security purposes." You answer because the scenario feels real. Only later do you realize the entire setup was false. That's pretexting, creating a fake story or identity to trick people into revealing information. Psychologists and security experts describe it as one of the most effective forms of social engineering. The manipulator doesn't steal information outright. They borrow trust by building a believable role, a bank employee, an IT technician, even a co-worker. The pretext disarms suspicion long enough for people to hand over what they shouldn't. Studies on persuasion show why it works. Humans are wired to respond to context. If the story feels consistent, the right clothes, the right jargon, the right timing, we assume legitimacy. The mind wants to resolve the situation quickly, not pick apart details. By the time doubt creeps in, the information is already gone. Pretexting isn't just in scams, it happens in workplaces too. A manipulator might say, "I'm gathering feedback for management," when really they're fishing for gossip. In relationships, someone may invent a scenario to test loyalty or uncover secrets. The structure is the same. The story gives cover. The target provides the truth. That's the dark efficiency of pretexting. It doesn't force you to reveal anything. It makes you believe you're doing the right thing by giving it away. Phishing psychology. When most people think of hacking, they imagine code, firewalls, and advanced systems. But the truth is, the weakest point in security is rarely the machine. It's the person using it. That's what phishing exploits. Not computers, but human psychology. A phishing attack doesn't break in. It invites you to open the door yourself. An email appears. Your account is locked. Click here to reset your password. The urgency is deliberate. Studies show that when people feel fear or time pressure, they're far more likely to act without thinking. Another email says, "Congratulations, you've won a gift card." That's curiosity and reward at work. Psychologists know our brains are wired to chase novelty, to click for pleasure the same way we chase uncertain wins in a slot machine. Even authority plays a role. Messages signed with official logos, fake signatures, or the appearance of corporate language bypass skepticism. We're trained to comply when authority speaks, and phishing leans heavily on that reflex. The trick works because it doesn't have to fool everyone. It just has to exploit the small window when someone is distracted, rushed, or hopeful. That single click is enough. That's why phishing remains one of the most successful manipulation tools in the world. Not because it's sophisticated, but because it's simple. It bypasses firewalls and goes straight for instincts: urgency, curiosity, obedience. And once those instincts take over, the lock doesn't need to be picked. You hand them the key. Baiting with curiosity gaps.
Headlines like, "You won't believe what happened next," spread like wildfire for a reason. They don't tell you everything. They tell you just enough to make your brain itch. That itch is the curiosity gap, the space between what you know and what you want to know, and manipulators use it to pull you in. Psychologists studying information-seeking behavior have found that curiosity acts like hunger. When we sense missing knowledge, the brain releases dopamine, driving us to close the gap. That's why clickbait works. The headline doesn't have to be profound. It just has to leave something dangling. Marketers exploit this constantly. Ads that say, "Doctors hate him for this one simple trick," don't explain anything. They don't need to. The brain fills in possibilities, and that mental effort pushes you to click. Even magicians use curiosity gaps, setting up tricks with stories that keep you waiting for the reveal. But this tactic isn't confined to entertainment or advertising. In conversations, people do it too. Someone hints, "I know something about them, but I shouldn't say." Immediately, attention locks in. It doesn't matter if the secret is trivial. Curiosity has already taken hold. The danger is that curiosity bypasses skepticism. You don't pause to ask if the information is useful or true. You just want it. And by the time you satisfy the craving, it may already have been used to sell, to manipulate, or to distract. That's the power of the curiosity gap. It doesn't need to promise value. It only needs to promise closure. Quid pro quo manipulation. On the surface, it sounds fair. I'll do this for you if you do that for me. A simple trade, an equal exchange. But in the hands of a manipulator, quid pro quo isn't about fairness. It's about leverage. Psychologists describe this as transactional influence. The manipulator offers something that seems generous, a favor, a gift, a privilege, but it isn't free. The price is hidden in the expectation that follows. I helped you, now you owe me. And once that unspoken debt is planted, the balance of power tilts. You see this in toxic workplaces where a boss offers special treatment only to demand loyalty in return. In relationships where a partner says, "Remember what I did for you," twisting kindness into obligation. Even in friendships where favors become chains, each one tightening the more you accept. The trick works because of reciprocity, a deep human instinct to repay what we're given. We hate feeling indebted, so we comply just to restore balance. But quid pro quo manipulation ensures the balance is never restored. Each trade is weighted in their favor, each exchange another step deeper into obligation. That's what makes it so dangerous. It hides behind the illusion of fairness. You think you've agreed to an even deal, but really, you've signed into control. Because in genuine connection, favors are gifts. In manipulation, they're investments. And when someone starts keeping score, the game is already rigged. Tailgating, physical and digital intrusion. You swipe your badge at a secure office door. As it clicks open, someone slips in behind you. No badge, no permission, just the confidence to follow. That's tailgating, a trick that turns politeness into vulnerability. Security experts define it as gaining access by riding the trust of others. In the physical world, it's walking through restricted doors by pretending you belong. In the digital world, it's piggybacking on someone else's login, session, or credentials. The manipulator doesn't break in. They wait for you to open the door and hold it for them. It works because humans are wired for courtesy. Few people want to look rude by slamming a door in someone's face, whether it's literal or digital. In one study, auditors who tested physical security by tailgating were successful most of the time. All it took was a smile, a nod, and the assumption that they belonged. Online, the pattern is similar. Shared passwords, borrowed devices, or leaving a session open all create opportunities for someone to slip in unnoticed. Once inside, the intruder moves freely, protected by your access. The danger of tailgating is that it hides in plain sight. Nothing looks suspicious because everything looks normal, and by the time you realize someone shouldn't be there, it's often too late. That's why awareness matters. In a world built on doors, both physical and digital, the easiest way through is to let someone else open them. And the smartest intruders know most of us will. Watering hole attacks. In the wild, predators don't chase prey endlessly. They wait by the watering hole, the one place every animal must eventually visit.
Hackers use the same strategy. Instead of targeting you directly, they compromise the places you trust most, knowing you'll come to them. These are called watering hole attacks. Cybersecurity researchers describe it simply. Attackers infect a popular website, tool, or community that a certain group relies on. When you visit, thinking it's safe, malicious code slips quietly into your system. You weren't careless, you just drank where everyone else drank. The psychology behind it is simple. We lower our guard in familiar places. Just as animals don't scan for predators when drinking, people rarely question the safety of sites they visit daily. That's what makes the tactic so effective. It doesn't rely on tricking you with a fake. It poisons the real thing. You see echoes of this outside the digital world too. Manipulators sometimes exploit trusted gathering points, a community group, a social circle, even a workplace, using the comfort of the setting to lower suspicion. The context disarms you before they ever speak. That's why watering hole attacks are so dangerous. They exploit trust itself. By the time you realize something is wrong, you're already compromised. It's a reminder that the most effective predators don't always hunt. Sometimes they just wait, and the moment you step to the water, they're already there. Reverse social engineering. Most manipulation is about pushing. You reach out, you persuade, you pressure. But reverse social engineering flips the script. Instead of chasing the target, you make the target chase you. It works like this. First, you create a problem. Maybe you tamper with someone's computer so it malfunctions. Then you present yourself as the solution, the helpful technician who just happens to be there. The victim doesn't feel manipulated. They feel grateful. They asked you for help, not the other way around. Psychologists studying persuasion note how powerful this reversal is. When we think we've chosen the interaction, we drop our defenses. Compliance feels like our idea, not someone else's trick. That illusion of control makes the manipulation nearly invisible.
You've seen softer versions of this outside of hacking. A manipulator spreads a rumor, then comforts you when it reaches your ears. A salesperson hints at a problem you didn't notice, then offers the perfect product to fix it. Even in relationships, someone might create drama, only to swoop in later as the one who calms it.
The danger of reverse social engineering is subtlety. Victims don't just fail to resist, they often thank the manipulator afterwards. The gratitude cements trust, making it easier to be exploited again. That's the brilliance of the trick. By letting the target come to you, you don't look like the aggressor, you look like the savior. And once someone believes you've rescued them, it's far harder for them to see you as the one who set the trap in the first place. Honey trap psychology. Throughout history, some of the most effective traps have never been built from metal or stone. They've been built from charm, beauty, and desire. A honey trap doesn't force compliance, it lures it. Psychologists describe honey traps as manipulations of attraction, romantic, sexual, or simply emotional. The target isn't threatened, they're enticed. They reveal secrets, bend rules, or change behavior, not because they were pressured, but because they wanted to please the one holding the bait. You see this in espionage stories, where intelligence agents seduce their marks to gain access to classified information. But the same principle plays out in smaller, everyday ways. A manipulator flirts to win favors at work. A scammer builds online romance to coax money from victims. Even friendships can turn into honey traps when charm is used as currency to control. It works because desire lowers defenses. When someone feels wanted, their brain floods with dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals tied to pleasure and trust. In that state, skepticism fades. The target doesn't question motives. They chase the high of approval, blind to the strings being pulled. The cruelty is that the trap doesn't need to last. Once the secret is shared or the favor secured, the bait can be withdrawn. What lingers is confusion, self-doubt, and the realization that intimacy was never real. That's the essence of the honey trap. It doesn't overpower you. It convinces you to walk willingly into the cage, smiling all the way in. Attention residue exploitation. You finish one task but keep thinking about it, even as you move to the next. A fragment of your attention lingers, stuck to the thing you just left behind. Psychologists call this attention residue, and it's one of the quietest ways your focus gets stolen.
Studies on productivity show how powerful this residue can be. When people switch tasks, their performance drops sharply, not because the new task is harder, but because part of their mind is still clinging to the old one. Even a short interruption can leave traces, pulling mental energy away for minutes or hours. Manipulators and marketers know this well. They don't need your full attention, they just need to leave a mark. A half-read headline, a notification you didn't check, a cryptic message that ends with, "We need to talk." Each one lingers in your head, disrupting everything else until you resolve it. That lingering tension can be used to guide behavior. An unfinished request keeps you restless until you complete it. A cliffhanger in a story keeps you returning, desperate for closure. A subtle distraction can weaken your defenses, making you easier to persuade when your mind is split. That's the danger of attention residue. It feels harmless, just a small distraction, a stray thought. But over time, it fragments focus, leaving you open to influence you don't even notice. Because the truth is, your attention doesn't move cleanly from one thing to the next. It leaves traces. And the people who know how to exploit those traces don't need your full mind, just the part you can't let go of. Decision fatigue, weaponization. Every choice takes energy, from small ones, what to wear, what to eat, to larger ones like contracts or commitments. Each decision drains the mind just a little. Psychologists call this decision fatigue, and by the end of a long day, the brain isn't just tired, it's vulnerable. Studies have shown the effect in startling ways. Judges, for example, were far more likely to grant parole early in the day when their minds were fresh. As the hours passed, the chances of approval dropped sharply. The choices weren't based purely on law or logic. They were shaped by exhaustion. Manipulators know how to exploit this. Car salespeople keep customers for hours, walking them through endless options until the final, big choice feels too overwhelming to resist. Scammers present a cascade of urgent questions, then slip in the real demand once their target is drained. Even in relationships, someone might push argument after argument until the other person finally gives in, not because they agree, but because they're too tired to keep fighting. Decision fatigue works because it makes the path of least resistance look like relief. The exhausted brain wants closure more than accuracy. It will choose badly just to choose at all. That's why this tactic is so dangerous. It doesn't force compliance through strength. It wears people down with choices until surrender feels like the only way out. Because when the mind is tired, it doesn't stop choosing. It just starts choosing whatever costs the least to think about, even if that means giving someone exactly what they want. Choice overload paralysis. Imagine standing in front of a shelf lined with 30 different jams. You taste a few, compare the rest, but in the end, you walk away without buying any. Now picture a shelf with just 6. The decision feels lighter, and you're more likely to choose one. Psychologists call this choice overload. When too many options don't empower us, they paralyze us. In a famous study, shoppers faced exactly that scenario. With 30 jams, people stopped to browse, but only 3% actually bought. With 6 jams, the number jumped to 30%. More options didn't lead to better decisions. They led to fewer decisions. Manipulators know how to weaponize this. Overwhelm someone with alternatives, contracts full of endless clauses, sales pitches drowning in add-ons, or even emotional choices in relationships. And the target becomes exhausted. When too many doors open at once, the easiest choice becomes letting someone else decide. This isn't limited to markets or negotiations. Choice overload shapes daily life. Streaming platforms paralyze viewers with endless lists. Job seekers freeze when faced with too many paths. Even simple tasks, when overcomplicated, push people to give up control. The danger is subtle. Abundance feels like freedom, but too much of it leaves us powerless. And in that moment of paralysis, anyone offering a simple solution suddenly looks like a savior. That's why choice overload is such a potent tool. Because when you can't decide between 30 doors, you'll gladly let someone else lead you through just one, even if it's not the one you would have chosen. The ZEIGARNIK effect. Unfinished tasks haunting. You leave a story halfway through. You stop mid-chore, mid-sentence, mid-thought, and later, no matter what else you do, your mind drifts back. The task feels louder unfinished than it ever did complete. Psychologists call this the ZEIGARNIK effect, the tendency to remember and obsess over what's incomplete more than what's done. The discovery came from a curious observation.
ZEIGARNIK, a Russian psychologist, noticed waiters remembered unpaid orders with perfect detail, but once the bill was settled, the memory vanished. It wasn't practice that sharpened memory. It was tension. The brain hates loose ends. This effect shows up everywhere. Cliffhangers in TV shows grip harder than finales. Unfinished projects sit in the back of your mind like ghosts. Even a simple to-do list keeps you restless until the box is checked. What's unresolved demands attention. Manipulators use this to their advantage. Marketers tease you with coming soon. Writers leave a mystery dangling. Even in conversations, someone says, "I'll tell you later," planting a hook that keeps you thinking long after. The incompletion itself becomes control. It works because the brain seeks closure. Until the loop is closed, the tension hums in the background, shaping choices and pulling focus. That's why the ZEIGARNIK effect is so powerful. It reminds us that sometimes what we can't finish doesn't just stay behind, it follows. And in the right hands, that lingering weight can be used to hold attention long after the words have stopped. Mere exposure effect abuse. Think of a song you didn't like at first. Maybe it felt annoying, repetitive, forgettable. But after hearing it over and over, on the radio, in stores, in passing, something shifted. You caught yourself humming it. You even started to like it. That's the mere exposure effect. The more we encounter something, the more we tend to prefer it. Psychologists have tested this for decades. In one study, participants rated random symbols. The ones shown most frequently were consistently judged as more appealing, even though they carried no meaning. Familiarity itself felt safe, and safety felt like liking. This is why advertisers flood us with repetition. Logos plastered on billboards, jingles played endlessly, faces that appear again and again until they feel trustworthy. Politicians rely on it too. Name recognition alone sways votes. The more you hear something, the more it carves into your brain. Manipulators can twist this in personal ways. Someone who shows up often, even casually, begins to feel reliable. A coworker who repeats their ideas subtly makes them sound more true. A toxic partner cycles through the same excuses until they start to feel believable. The trick works because the brain equates familiarity with safety, but familiarity isn't proof of value. It's just exposure. And once that shortcut takes hold, people can slip past your defenses simply by showing up enough times. That's the danger of the mere exposure effect. The more something repeats, the more it feels right. Not because it is, but because your mind has grown too used to questioning it. Priming for specific responses. Sometimes the answer you give isn't really yours. It's been shaped moments before by something you barely noticed. This is priming, the subtle influence of words, images, or experiences that prepare your mind to respond in a certain way without realizing it. Psychologists first demonstrated this with language tests. People exposed to words like Florida, bingo, and retirement walked more slowly afterward than those given neutral words. Another study showed that after reading words linked to politeness, participants waited patiently before interrupting. When exposed to words linked to rudeness, they interrupted quickly. The mind, nudged by suggestion, shifted behavior without conscious thought. You see it everywhere. Marketers prime you by surrounding products with images of luxury, so you associate them with status. Negotiators slip certain words into conversation to steer your perception of fairness or risk. Even casual conversations prime responses. Mention how tired someone looks, and they'll often feel more drained than before. Priming works because the brain builds shortcuts. A single word, color, or image can activate entire networks of thought and emotion. Once triggered, those associations quietly tilt the direction of your choices. That's what makes it so powerful and so hard to detect. You rarely notice when it's happening. You just feel like you made a natural decision. And that's the danger. Because when your mind is primed, your answers don't come from nowhere. They come from a script someone else slipped into your head first. Framing effect manipulation. A doctor tells you a treatment has a 90% survival rate. You feel reassured. The same doctor tells you the treatment has a 10% death rate. Suddenly, it feels frightening. The numbers are identical. The truth hasn't changed, but your perception has. That's the framing effect. The way information is presented can matter more than the information itself. Psychologists have tested this again and again. People asked to choose between ground beef that is 80% lean versus 20% fat consistently prefer the first option, though both describe the same product. Voters respond differently depending on whether a policy is described as protecting jobs or preventing job loss. The frame shapes emotion, and emotion drives choice. Manipulators use this constantly. Salespeople highlight savings instead of costs. Politicians emphasize benefits instead of risks. Even in personal relationships, framing appears, "I'm not late, I'm just giving you extra time to get ready." The facts stay the same, but the perspective shifts, and with it, the response. The danger is that frames bypass logic. The brain reacts to the emotional color of words long before it processes the numbers behind them. By the time you've thought it through, the feeling has already tipped your decision. That's why framing is so powerful. It doesn't change reality. It changes the lens through which reality is seen. And once the lens shifts, people rarely notice the trick, only the choice they feel certain they made themselves. The sunk cost fallacy trap. You've bought the ticket, you've poured hours into the project, you've stayed in the relationship long past its joy, and still you keep going, not because it's working, but because you've already given so much. That's the sunk cost fallacy, the trap of continuing simply because you've invested, even when walking away would be wiser. Psychologists first studied this through experiments with business decisions. When people invested money into failing projects, they didn't cut their losses. They doubled down, throwing more money in to make it worth it. The more they had already lost, the more desperate they became to justify it. It shows up everywhere. Gamblers chase losses, convinced the next hand will make it back. Workers stay in jobs they hate because of the years they've already given. Partners cling to broken relationships saying, "But we've been together so long." The past, heavy with investment, chains them to a future they no longer want. Manipulators exploit this by keeping people invested. A scammer might start small, asking for a little money, then escalate once the victim feels too far in to stop. Abusive partners use history as leverage, reminding their victims of all the time already spent, all the memories already built. The fallacy works because the human mind hates waste, but refusing to let go creates more of it. That's why this trap is so dangerous. It convinces you that staying is strength, when in truth, it's surrender, not to logic, but to the ghost of what you've already given away. Availability heuristic distortion. A plane crash makes the news, and for weeks afterward, people fear flying. Car accidents happen daily, but they don't dominate headlines. Statistically, the car is far more dangerous, yet the plane feels riskier. That's the availability heuristic, the mental shortcut where we judge likelihood not by facts, but by how easily examples come to mind. Psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman first documented this bias in the 1970s. Ask people whether more English words start with the letter K or have K as the third letter, and most say the first. In reality, the second is far more common, but words that start with K are easier to recall, so they feel more frequent. This bias shapes more than trivia, it shapes decisions. After shark attacks hit the news, beaches empty. After a burglary in the neighborhood, people rush to install alarms. The vivid, recent example outweighs the quiet statistics that tell a different story. Manipulators and marketers exploit this constantly. Advertisers flood you with stories of rare risks to sell protection. Politicians amplify dramatic but unlikely dangers to sway voters. Even in personal arguments, someone might pull one vivid example from memory to outweigh 100 invisible truths. The danger lies in how natural it feels. The mind trusts ease of recall as if it were proof, but memory isn't measurement. That's why the availability heuristic is so dangerous. It doesn't just distort what you fear, it reshapes what you believe is real. And once belief shifts, behavior follows. Representative heuristic exploitation. Picture someone quiet, bookish, always scribbling notes. If asked, most people would guess they're a librarian rather than a salesperson. But statistically, there are far more salespeople than librarians. That's the representative heuristic, judging probability by resemblance rather than reality. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed this bias in classic experiments. Participants were given short character sketches and asked to assign probabilities to occupations or outcomes. Over and over, people ignored actual base rates and chose based on surface traits. If someone looked the part, We assumed they were the part. This shortcut guides everyday decisions. We assume a product in sleek packaging must be high quality. We assume someone in a suit must be competent. We assume confidence signals truth. These judgments aren't built on evidence, but on resemblance to a mental stereotype. Manipulators exploit this constantly. Scammers dress like professionals to gain trust. Politicians adopt the cadence of strong leaders to trigger familiarity. Even in personal relationships, people lean on stereotypes, framing themselves as the caring friend or responsible partner, knowing we'll believe the role if the costume fits. The danger is that the representative heuristic feels intuitive. It's fast, effortless, and often wrong. By the time we realize the truth, the decision is already made. That's why this trick is so powerful. It doesn't persuade with facts. It persuades with patterns, convincing you not by what is, but by what it looks like. The assumptive close. Most people think persuasion is about convincing someone to say yes, but one of the most effective tricks skips that step entirely. Instead of asking for agreement, you act as though it's already been given. That's the assumptive close, closing the deal by assuming the answer is yes. Salespeople use it constantly. Instead of asking, "Would you like to buy this?" they say, "Would you like it delivered Monday or Wednesday?" The choice isn't whether to buy, but how. By framing the decision as already made, the target feels nudged into compliance without noticing. Psychologists link this to the power of default thinking. The human brain prefers the path of least resistance. When presented with options inside a frame, we rarely step outside it. If the question assumes agreement, rejecting it feels like extra work. But this trick isn't limited to sales. You see it in relationships. Should we take your car or mine? Instead of, do you want to go? You see it in workplaces. When should I put you down for this project? Rather than, do you want to do it? Each time the assumption replaces the question. The power of the assumptive close lies in subtlety. It doesn't force agreement. It makes agreement feel like the natural outcome. And that's why it works. Because most of the time, people don't stop to challenge the frame. They just pick from the options in front of them, never realizing the real decision was already made for them. Creating false urgency. You've seen it everywhere. Offer ends tonight. Only 3 left in stock. Act now before it's gone. The pressure builds and suddenly you're clicking buy. Not because you need the thing, but because the clock is ticking. That's false urgency, one of the most reliable tricks in persuasion. Psychologists studying decision-making have shown how time pressure reshapes choices. When people feel rushed, they rely less on analysis and more on instinct. Logic fades, impulse takes over. That's why countdown timers on websites work. The numbers themselves don't change reality, but they create the illusion that time is slipping away. Scarcity is part of it too. Our brains evolved in environments where rare resources meant survival. When something seems scarce, even artificially, it feels more valuable. Pair that with urgency and you've got a recipe for fast, unquestioned compliance. You see it in marketing, but also in everyday manipulation. A friend says, "If you don't decide now, I'll ask someone else." A boss pressures you with, "I need an answer immediately." The demand for speed makes refusal harder, even when you know you should pause. The trick works because urgency shuts down reflection. We don't ask whether the timer is real, whether the scarcity is manufactured, whether the choice deserves time. We just act. That's why false urgency is so effective and so dangerous. Because once the clock starts ticking in your head, you'll do almost anything just to stop the sound. The puppy dog close. Imagine walking into a pet store. You're not sure you're ready for a dog, but the salesperson smiles and says, "Why don't you just take the puppy home for the weekend? If it doesn't work out, bring him back." Of course, almost no one brings the puppy back. Once you've lived with it, bonded with it, and let it curl up in your lap, the deal is already done. That's the puppy dog close. Psychologists studying commitment call this the endowment effect. Once we experience ownership, even briefly, the value of the thing skyrockets in our minds. We don't want to give it up because giving it up feels like a loss. Salespeople use this constantly. Car dealers let customers test drive for days. Software companies offer free trials. Even gyms encourage a week of free classes. The trick isn't to convince you up front. It's to let you taste ownership long enough that returning it feels unthinkable. This tactic slips into relationships and workplaces too. Someone lets you borrow responsibility, a role, or a privilege, knowing you'll work harder to keep it. Once you've held it, you'll fight not to lose it. The puppy dog close works because it reframes the decision. It's no longer, do I want this? It's, can I stand to give this up? And most people can't. That's why it's so effective. The moment you feel something is yours, even temporarily, you're already halfway to keeping it forever. Bait and switch psychology. It begins with an offer that feels too good to refuse. A deal, a promise, an opportunity shining like gold. You lean closer, believing this is what you came for. But once you've taken the first step, the prize changes. The thing you were promised vanishes, replaced by something less valuable or more costly. That's bait and switch. In marketing, it's almost cliché. An ad shows a product at a stunning price, but when you arrive, it's sold out. The salesperson then nudges you toward a pricier version. You feel tricked, but you're already in the store, already invested in walking away with something. Psychologists explain this through commitment and consistency. Once you've pictured yourself with the reward, your brain clings to the image. Walking away feels like losing, even if the thing offered wasn't real. That discomfort pushes people to accept the substitute rather than leave empty-handed. But bait and switch isn't limited to sales. In relationships, someone may lure with affection, then switch to control. In workplaces, jobs are pitched one way, only to reveal harsher terms after you've signed. The principle is always the same. Lure with the sweet, deliver the bitter, and let the target's own investment keep them from leaving. That's what makes this tactic so cruel. It doesn't just take advantage of your choices, it takes advantage of your need to stay consistent with the choice you already made. And once that hook is in, even knowing you were tricked isn't always enough to make you walk away. The sharp angle close. You're in the middle of a negotiation, and the other person hesitates. I'd do it, but only if you can give me a discount. Most people panic, scrambling to defend their price. But the skilled persuader smiles and flips the moment. If I give you that discount, do we have a deal right now? That's the sharp angle close, using the objection as the opening to close immediately. Psychologists studying persuasion call this a conditional commitment. Instead of arguing against resistance, you reframe it as the last obstacle before agreement. The mind now faces a simple choice: accept the trade-off and commit, or back down and risk looking inconsistent. You'll see this tactic in sales all the time. A customer says, I'd buy it if it had free shipping. The seller replies, if I add free shipping, are you ready to order today? The focus shifts from maybe to now. It's not limited to business. In daily life, people use the same structure. If I do this for you, will you handle the rest? If I agree to that, can we move forward? Each one corners the listener into either closing or admitting their objection wasn't real in the first place. The sharp angle works because it feels fair. You're not dismissing their concern, you're addressing it. But in doing so, you also anchor them to an instant decision. And that's the genius of it. What looked like resistance becomes the very lever that seals the deal. Fear-based selling. Every sales pitch promises something: comfort, success, happiness. But some don't focus on what you'll gain. They focus on what you'll lose if you say no. That's fear-based selling, a strategy built not on hope, but on threat. Psychologists studying decision-making have found that loss aversion is far stronger than the desire for gain. Losing $100 hurts more than winning $100 feels good. Manipulators know this, so they flip persuasion around. Instead of, here's what this product can give you, they say, here's what happens if you don't have it. You see it in advertising. Without this insurance, you could lose everything. Don't let your family go unprotected. Fear paints pictures of disaster so vividly that the solution feels mandatory. It's not just products. Politicians lean on fear-based messaging too. If we don't act, chaos is coming. The focus isn't progress, it's survival. Even in personal relationships, fear plays its part. A partner might warn, if you don't do this, I don't know if we'll last. A boss might say, without this, your job could be at risk. The words are simple, but the effect is powerful. Compliance through dread. This works because fear bypasses rational thought. When we feel threatened, our brains shift to fight or flight. narrowing choices down to the fastest escape. And the manipulator is already waiting with the exit sign. That's the power and danger of fear-based selling. It doesn't inspire you to want more. It convinces you you'll have nothing unless you obey. The takeaway close. Imagine a salesperson showing you a product. You're interested, but you hesitate. Instead of pushing harder, they shrug and say, maybe this isn't right for you. Suddenly, you feel a pang. You weren't sure before, but now that it's slipping away, you want it more. That's the takeaway close. Creating desire by threatening to remove the choice. Psychologists explain this with reactance theory. When freedom of choice feels restricted, people fight to reclaim it. Tell someone they can't have something, and their want for it grows. It's the same instinct that makes forbidden fruit taste sweeter. This tactic works everywhere. In sales, removing an option often pushes the buyer to commit before it's gone. In relationships, someone might say, maybe I'm asking too much from you, prompting the other person to prove them wrong. Even in everyday conversations, taking back an offer can make people scramble to accept it. The brilliance of the takeaway is that it doesn't push, it pulls back, and the pull creates tension, a gap between what you might lose and what you still want to keep. That gap drives action. Of course, it's risky. Push too far and people really will walk away. But done right, the takeaway close flips hesitation into urgency. That's why it works so well. Sometimes the fastest way to make someone want something isn't to sell it harder. It's to make them believe they're about to lose it. Confusion pricing strategies. You walk into a store and see 3 plans. Basic for $49, standard for $79, premium for $83. The difference between standard and premium is tiny, but the gap from basic is huge. The numbers feel messy, uneven, hard to process. That's not bad design, it's deliberate. Confusion in pricing makes you surrender logic and lean on instinct. Psychologists studying consumer behavior call this choice architecture. When numbers are clear, people compare carefully. But when prices are cluttered, odd numbers, hidden fees, overlapping packages, the brain tires quickly, and a tired brain takes shortcuts. Most people either grab the middle option to feel safe or default to what's presented as popular. You see it online constantly. Subscriptions stack add-ons, discounts, trial periods, cancellation fees, all designed not to inform, but to overwhelm. Airlines use it with ticket categories and endless upgrades. Even restaurants slip in decoy items priced absurdly high so everything else looks reasonable by comparison. Confusion works because humans hate uncertainty. When choices feel tangled, we stop asking what's the best value and start asking what's the easiest way to decide. And the seller has already lined up the easy option for you. That's why confusion pricing is so powerful. It doesn't force you into a bad choice. It drowns you in enough noise that the bad choice feels like relief. And once you've paid, you may not even realize the trick, only that you're holding a bill for more than you ever meant to spend. Mirror neuron manipulation. When you see someone smile, your own lips twitch upward. When they yawn, your jaw loosens. When they cross their arms, you feel the urge to mirror them. This isn't coincidence. It's the work of mirror neurons, brain cells that fire not only when we act, but when we watch someone else act. And manipulators know how to use them. Discovered in the 1990s, mirror neurons explain why we mimic gestures, accents, even moods without realizing it. They're the foundation of empathy, letting us feel what others feel by simulating their actions in our own minds. But what connects us can also control us. Psychologists studying persuasion have found that subtle mirroring builds trust. A salesperson leans forward when you do, sips water when you sip, crosses their legs in the same direction. Without noticing, you start to feel in sync, as though they get you. That feeling of connection makes you more likely to agree. This shows up everywhere. Leaders mirror their audience's energy to win loyalty. Negotiators mirror posture to soften resistance. Even in personal relationships, mirroring is used to create closeness, or to feign it when none exists. The trick works because the brain confuses mimicry with understanding. When someone reflects us back, we assume they share our thoughts, values, or emotions. That's why mirror neuron manipulation is so effective. It doesn't persuade through words at all. It persuades through reflection, convincing us that the person across from us isn't just listening. They're already on our side. False memory implantation. memory feels solid. We imagine it as a recording we can rewind, play back, and trust. But memory isn't a tape, it's a story, and stories can be edited. That's why false memories can be planted, making people recall things that never happened. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus proved this in famous experiments. Participants were told childhood stories, some true, one invented. Over time, many came to remember the false event vividly, even adding details that were never suggested. Their minds filled in gaps, weaving fiction into fact. This works because memory is reconstructive. Each time we recall an event, we rebuild it from fragments, insert a suggestion, a leading question, a fabricated detail, a confident statement, and the brain stitches it in seamlessly. Later, we can't tell where the memory ends and the suggestion begins.
Manipulators use this to distort reality. In arguments, they insist, "That's not what happened. You said this instead," until doubt replaces certainty. In interrogations, suggestive questioning makes suspects remember details they never saw. Even in everyday life, friends or family can unintentionally alter each other's recollections through repeated retellings.
The danger is that false memories feel as real as true ones. The brain doesn't tag them as fake. Once planted, they can shape beliefs, identities, even decisions. That's why false memory implantation is so unsettling. It doesn't just change how we see the past, it changes who we believe we are. And once someone controls your memories, they don't just shape your story, they shape your reality. The misinformation effect. You witness an event. Later, someone asks you about it, but they slip in a detail that wasn't there. Maybe they say the car was blue instead of green, or that the man was holding a knife instead of a wallet. Weeks later, you recall the event again. Now you're certain the car was blue. You're certain the man had a knife. That's the misinformation effect, when memory bends to fit false details introduced after the fact. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this in groundbreaking studies. Participants watched a film of a traffic accident, then answered questions about it. When asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? People estimated higher speeds, and later remembered broken glass that never appeared. Just a single word changed the shape of the memory. This effect explains why eyewitness testimony, long considered reliable, is often deeply flawed. Memory isn't fixed, it's fluid. Each time we recall, we reconstruct, and during reconstruction, misinformation can slip in unnoticed. Manipulators exploit this vulnerability. A lawyer frames questions to alter perception of an event. A media outlet repeats a false detail until it becomes part of the story. Even in personal conflicts, someone can insist on a version of events until you begin to doubt your own recall. The danger of the misinformation effect is that it feels seamless. Once the false detail is woven in, the memory doesn't feel different from the truth. And if you can't trust your own mind, the person supplying the narrative gains immense power. Source confusion creation. You remember the fact, but not where you learned it. Did you read it in a book, hear it in a conversation, or see it in a movie? Over time, the source fades while the memory remains. That gap is called source confusion, and it can be exploited to make people believe, repeat, and defend things they never verified. Psychologists studying memory have shown how easily this happens. Participants exposed to a statement in one context later recalled it as fact, forgetting whether it came from a trusted expert or a casual remark. The information stuck. The origin didn't. This makes people vulnerable. A rumor repeated enough times loses its label as rumor. A story heard in childhood is retold in adulthood as something personally experienced. Even fabricated facts picked up from advertising or social media can feel true simply because the source has dissolved into the background. Manipulators use this deliberately. Politicians seed half-truths in speeches, knowing the details will be remembered long after the disclaimers are forgotten. Marketers rely on repetition, letting slogans and claims sink in without concern for where they started. In relationships, someone might insist, "You told me this once," to implant doubt or false memory. The danger is subtle. Once a detail is free from its source, it becomes harder to challenge. People defend it not because they know it's true, but because they no longer know how they know. That's why source confusion is so powerful. It untethers memory from origin, leaving the mind full of facts that feel real, even when the roots are lost or were never there at all. Imagination inflation technique. Close your eyes and picture it. You're at a birthday party as a child. Balloons, cake, laughter. In your mind, you see yourself reaching for the candles. Now picture tripping, falling, and everyone gasping. Even if it never happened, the image feels strangely real. That's imagination inflation, the phenomenon where vividly imagining an event makes you more likely to believe it actually occurred. Psychologists demonstrated this in the 1990s. Participants were asked to imagine everyday events like getting lost in a mall or spilling punch at a wedding. Later, many confidently reported those imagined events as genuine memories. The simple act of visualization blurred the line between thought and reality. It works because memory is reconstructive, not fixed. Each recall is a rebuilding, and imagination supplies vivid building blocks. The more detail you add, the colors, the smells, the emotions, the stronger the memory feels, even if it's false. Manipulators can use this deliberately. A leading question, "Remember when you felt ignored at that party?" invites imagination that later hardens into belief. Advertisers ask you to picture using their product, making the imagined satisfaction feel real. Even in relationships, someone might push you to recall slights or betrayals that never happened until you start to believe them. The danger of imagination inflation is that the brain doesn't tag imagined memories as fiction. Once rehearsed enough times, they feel as real as lived experience. That's why this trick is so powerful. Because sometimes what you remember isn't what you lived, it's what someone wanted you to imagine. The DRM paradigm exploitation. You hear a list of words: bed, rest, tired, dream, nap, pillow. Later, you're asked to recall them. Almost everyone confidently includes another word, sleep, but sleep was never on the list. This is the Dies-Roediger-McDermott paradigm, or DRM effect, a psychological quirk where the brain falsely remembers related words or ideas as if they had been present. Psychologists James Dies, Henry Roediger, and Kathleen McDermott revealed just how easily associations twist memory. When we process information, our brains build networks of meaning. Words linked to a central theme pull others into the web, even if they were never spoken. What feels like memory is actually inference, stitched together seamlessly. This effect goes beyond word lists. It shapes how we recall conversations, events, even entire relationships. A few details about kindness, warmth, and laughter can lead someone to remember a friend as more supportive than they were. A handful of cues about conflict can inflate memories of tension. Our minds fill in blanks with what should have been there. Manipulators can exploit this. By surrounding someone with suggestive details, they can implant false impressions that later feel like genuine memory. In arguments, sprinkling certain words can shape how the other person recalls the exchange. In advertising, clustering ideas around comfort, family, or success makes people remember a product as tied to those values, even if no direct claim was made. The danger is that DRM errors don't feel like guesses, they feel certain. And that's the unsettling truth. Your memory isn't just what happened, it's what your brain decided must have happened, whether it did or not. Retroactive interference induction. Memory feels permanent, but it isn't. Each time you learn something new, it doesn't just add to the archive. Sometimes it overwrites what was already there. Psychologists call this retroactive interference, when newer information interferes with older memories, blurring or replacing them altogether. Classic experiments show how this works. Participants learned a list of words, then later learned a second, similar list. When asked to recall the first list, their memory collapsed. The new words didn't just sit beside the old ones, they disrupted them, making recall almost impossible. This happens in daily life too. You move to a new address and quickly forget the old one. You change a password and the old version slips away. Even relationships show the effect. New experiences with a person can reshape or even erase earlier impressions, altering how you remember them. Manipulators can exploit this by layering fresh narratives over old truths. A partner insists, "That's not what happened. This is what really happened," repeating it until the new story overshadows your original memory. Politicians bury past mistakes under waves of new messaging. Marketers flood you with updated slogans so often that the earlier ones vanish. The danger is that retroactive interference doesn't feel like loss. It feels natural, as though the past was never different. And that's what makes it so powerful. By feeding you new information at the right time, someone doesn't need to erase your memories directly. They just have to bury them, knowing your brain will do the rest. The sleeper effect usage. Sometimes a message doesn't persuade you right away. You hear it, you doubt it, maybe even laugh it off. But then, weeks later, the same idea returns to your mind. Softer, more believable, harder to shake. That's the sleeper effect. When a message gains power as time passes, especially after its original source has been forgotten or dismissed.
Psychologists first discovered this in studies of propaganda. People exposed to weak or untrustworthy sources didn't believe the message at first, but as time went on, they remembered the content while forgetting where it came from. The words remained. The doubt disappeared.
You see this everywhere. Advertisements with ridiculous claims still plant seeds. Rumors dismissed as false still linger in memory. Political messages from questionable voices return months later, sounding like truth. The source fades, but the impression sticks. Manipulators use this to their advantage. They don't need immediate compliance. They just need exposure. Plant the idea now, let time erode the resistance, and watch as the message resurfaces later, stronger than before. The sleeper effect works because memory is uneven. Content outlasts context. We forget who told us something long before we forget what was said. That's why it's so dangerous. A lie once heard doesn't need to convince you today. It only needs to survive long enough for you to recall it tomorrow, stripped of the doubt that once kept it weak. CRYPTOMNESIA exploitation. You think you've had a brilliant idea, it feels fresh, original, yours, but somewhere in the past you heard it before. A conversation, a book, a passing remark. The memory of the source has faded, leaving only the content behind. That's cryptomnesia, when forgotten memories return disguised as brand new thoughts. Psychologists first studied this by testing recall. Participants were asked to generate lists of words, then later came back to the same task. Over and over, they repeated words already given by others, believing them to be their own. The memory had resurfaced but stripped of its origin. This quirk of the mind might seem harmless, but manipulators can turn it into a weapon. By planting ideas subtly, a casual suggestion, a half-joking remark, even a story told in passing, they can later make you come up with those ideas yourself. And because you believe the thought is yours, you defend it more fiercely than if it came from outside. You see this in advertising when slogans seep into everyday speech. You see it in relationships when someone claims ownership of a goal or plan that was whispered to them weeks earlier. Even in politics and media, repeated narratives become common sense as people unknowingly recycle them as their own insights. The danger lies in how natural it feels. A borrowed idea doesn't feel borrowed. It feels personal, authentic, true. That's why cryptomnesia is so powerful. It doesn't just feed you thoughts. It convinces you they were yours all along, making you both the author and the believer of someone else's design. Confabulation encouragement. The mind hates gaps. When memory fails, it doesn't admit silence. It fills the space with stories, fragments of truth stitched with invention. This is confabulation, recalling events that never happened, details that were never there, but believing them with absolute certainty. Neurologists first observed this in patients with brain damage. When asked about missing details, patients didn't say, "I don't know." They created explanations, fabricated but convincing even to themselves. Later studies showed that even healthy brains do the same. With the right questions, anyone can be led to remember things that never occurred. That's where manipulation enters. Instead of demanding facts, a skilled manipulator asks leading prompts. "You must remember feeling nervous that day, right?" Or, "Wasn't the man wearing a red jacket?" The mind, eager to close the gap, supplies the answer. Later, the invented detail feels like lived memory. This happens in interrogations where pressure and repetition blur truth, in arguments where someone insists until you begin to picture what they describe, even in marketing where ads encourage you to remember feelings you never had, tied to products you've never used. Confabulation works because the brain values coherence over accuracy. A complete story, even partly false, feels safer than admitting uncertainty, and once you believe the story, it anchors into identity itself. That's why confabulation encouragement is so insidious. It doesn't just create lies, it convinces you they've always been your truth. And once you believe your own invention, no one has to control you. you'll do it yourself. The Mandela effect manipulation. Ask a room of people whether the Monopoly man wears a monocle, and many will nod. He doesn't. Ask if Darth Vader ever said, "Luke, I am your father," and most will swear he did. The real line is different. These aren't small slips. They're shared illusions, collective false memories. Psychologists call it the Mandela effect, named after the widespread but false belief that Nelson Mandela died in prison decades before he actually did. The effect shows how fragile memory is, especially when reinforced by groups. When enough people agree on a version of reality, even a false one, the brain prioritizes consensus over accuracy. Social proof outweighs individual recall. Manipulators can weaponize this. Repeating a false detail often enough, in enough voices, creates the illusion of truth. A rumor becomes history. A fabricated story, repeated across conversations, feels more reliable than a solitary memory of the truth. Media, politics, and advertising all lean on this, not by creating facts, but by shaping what people believe they've always known. The danger is that the Mandela effect erodes confidence in memory itself. If large groups can remember something that never happened, then what does it mean to trust your own mind? That doubt creates space for someone else to supply their version of reality, one you may adopt just to feel certain again. That's the unsettling power of the Mandela effect. It doesn't just distort the past, it builds a past that never was, and convinces you it's the only one that ever existed. Groupthink enforcement. A decision is made in a meeting. You notice flaws, risks, reasons to hesitate. But when you glance around the table, everyone else is nodding. No one speaks up, and so you stay quiet too. That silence is the fuel of groupthink, when the desire for harmony overrides the need for truth. Psychologist Irving Janis first described groupthink after studying political disasters like the Bay of Pigs invasion. Intelligent people, capable of critical thought, went along with catastrophic choices because challenging the group felt harder than questioning reality. Doubt was sacrificed for belonging. Groupthink thrives on unspoken pressure. Dissenters fear being seen as disloyal, negative, or disruptive. Leaders, whether intentionally or not, reward agreement and punish resistance. Over time, individuals stop voicing concerns, and the illusion of consensus grows stronger. The group marches forward, not because everyone believes, but because no one dares to break the spell. This isn't confined to politics. You see it in workplaces where bad projects continue because no one challenges management. In families where harmful traditions survive because questioning them feels like betrayal. In friendships where silence is easier than standing apart. Manipulators love groupthink because it polices itself. Once the pressure to conform takes hold, no outside force is needed. The group enforces obedience on its own members. That's why groupthink is so dangerous. It doesn't just silence voices, it erases them. And by the time someone speaks the truth out loud, it may already be too late to turn the group back. The bystander effect exploitation. A cry for help echoes down the street. Dozens hear it, but no one moves. Each person looks to the others, waiting, assuming someone else will act. Minutes pass, and still nothing happens. This is the bystander effect, the paralysis that strikes when responsibility is spread across a group. Psychologists Bibb Latane and John Darley proved this in the late 1960s after the infamous murder of Kitty Genovese, where reports claimed dozens of witnesses failed to intervene. In experiments, they found that when people believed they were alone, they helped quickly. But in groups, action plummeted, responsibility dissolved into silence. Manipulators know how to use this inertia. In workplaces, a leader may let harmful behavior slide in public, knowing no one will speak up if everyone assumes someone else will. In scams, perpetrators exploit crowded settings, betting that observers will freeze rather than intervene. Even in abusive relationships, public outbursts may be staged in front of others precisely because the presence of witnesses reduces the likelihood of action. The bystander effect works because silence feels safe. When no one else moves, staying still feels like the right choice, even when it's the wrong one. That's why it's so dangerous. The more people are present, the less likely any one person is to step forward. And in that vacuum, harm continues unchecked. Because sometimes the greatest weapon isn't aggression. It's the quiet assurance that everyone else will wait, and while they wait, nothing changes. De-individuation triggers. A crowd gathers at night. Faces blur in the dark, voices rise, and soon people act in ways they never would alone, shouting, breaking, even hurting. This is de-individuation, when the sense of self dissolves into the group and individual restraint fades away. Psychologists Philip Zimbardo and others studied this phenomenon, showing how anonymity and immersion in groups lower inhibitions. When people feel unidentifiable, accountability disappears. Uniforms, masks, and even online usernames all act as triggers, loosening the grip of personal responsibility. You see it in riots, where ordinary citizens commit extraordinary violence. In online spaces, where hidden behind avatars, people unleash cruelty they would never voice face to face. Even in workplaces or schools, group rituals and chants can dissolve individuality, pushing people to follow the crowd. Manipulators understand how to spark de-individuation. Leaders give groups symbols, slogans, or uniforms, encouraging unity while erasing individuality. Once people stop seeing themselves as I and start seeing only we, they become easier to steer, toward loyalty, toward aggression, toward acts they never imagined. The trick works because identity itself is fragile. Strip away the markers of individuality, immerse someone in a group, and their moral compass bends. That's why de-individuation is so dangerous. It doesn't create new desires. It simply removes the barriers that usually hold them back. And in that moment, the person who once whispered can roar with the crowd, forgetting who they were the second the mask went on. Social loafing encouragement. When people pull a rope alone, they strain with full force. But add more people to the rope, and each individual starts to slack. The effort spreads, the responsibility blurs, and suddenly no one is giving their best. Psychologists call this social loafing, when individual effort declines inside a group. Experiments in the 1970s measured this precisely. Participants asked to clap or shout in groups produced less noise than when they performed alone. The larger the group, the smaller each person's contribution. The mind whispers, "No one will notice if I hold back," and soon everyone holds back. Manipulators can encourage this decline. Leaders who want control sometimes create oversized committees, knowing diffusion of effort will leave them as the only strong voice. In workplaces, managers pile people onto a task, aware that individuals will contribute less, making it easier to steer the outcome. Even in classrooms or friendships, someone who hides within the group avoids accountability while still enjoying the rewards. The tactic works because responsibility dilutes in numbers. Alone, failure feels personal. In a group, failure belongs to everyone and to no one. That safety breeds laziness or worse, obedience to whoever steps forward to fill the vacuum. That's why social loafing is so dangerous. It doesn't just weaken effort, it erodes individuality, leaving people easier to guide by the one person still pulling hardest. Because in the end, the fewer who carry the weight, the more power lies with the hands that refuse to let go of the rope.